This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning, it's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a funny one, isn't it? Population of this country, 60, 70 million, and the numbers of people or the constituencies, the cohorts of people that often dominate our thoughts and our discourse are almost always relatively tiny. But I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. It tracks tides, doesn't it? It tracks changes. I've been telling you for some time, this isn't an I told you so moment, I've been telling you for some time that net migration was set to plummet. In fact, it prompted some fairly abusive responses about 6 months ago. And indeed, I've already seen people claiming that they don't believe the current figures. So our friends on the far right of the UK media have very helpfully tried to turn it into a story about people leaving the country, British people leaving the country, a narrative that is not remotely supported by the statistics. But since when did these people care about statistics? And that, of course, means that you can now believe the figures because it's proof that everybody is running away from Rachel Reeves. I swear to you that I didn't know that the news bulletin there at 10 o'clock was going to contain the phrase illegal meat. I promise you I didn't. I'm not sure it's even a phrase I've ever heard before, because I had just resurrected the ghost of Project Fear. Do you remember Project Fear? When every expert in the country was queuing up to tell us what the impact of leaving the single market or the customs union would be, and every idiot in the country was queuing up to shout Project Fear at you. Actually, illegal meat was one of the things that Project Fear contained. So, of course, was insecurity across Europe, military insecurity across Europe, a sort of fracture of the old alliances caused by Brexit and alongside Russian misinformation. Funny how it's all happening. Still, at least we've got our pint bottles of champagne with which to console ourselves. You knew things were bad, didn't you, when they started pretending that was a genuine cause for celebration? Even though, again, anybody who knew anything about anything could have told you at the time it was never going to happen. No manufacturer is going to bother making pint bottles of champagne just so that Nadine Dorries can pop her cork. It was clearly nonsense, but by that moment in the cycle, we were reduced to pretending that it was, oh yes, that's worth it then. Oh, and was it crowns on pint glasses? We're going to put crowns back on pint glasses. So the thing that was going to make us richer, get rid of all the foreigners, turn us into the 19th century international powerhouse that we once were, without, of course, having the attendant consequences of slavery or the Industrial Revolution. All of that, it's going to be amazing. And then within about 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, we were reduced to telling lies, in Jacob Rees-Mogg's case, about the signage on the Dartford Tunnel, pretending that having pint bottles of champagne would be the best thing since sliced bread, and putting crown marks back on pint glasses. So Project Fear is now unfolding, as some of us knew it would. Hugely exacerbated, of course, by COVID, and that itself hugely exacerbated by the fact that we put a complete cretin in charge of our response to COVID and the crucial decision-making at that peculiar and unprecedented time in UK history, compounded as well, of course, by 12 years of austerity, by the absolutely appalling filleting of public services, which makes life worse for everybody except the extremely wealthy. Except the wealthy, really, but that constituency is now being nibbled at. People who would have been wealthy in 2010 probably not feeling wealthy today. And then you throw Liz Truss into the mix just for, clicks and giggles. All of which speaks to a really grim truth that I hate, actually. As a patriot, I hate what's been done to this country. I tell you every day. We're conscious, of course, that we can't serve up an unleavened diet of unhappiness and misery. We're not that kind of programme. We could serve up an unleavened diet of unhappiness and misery, blame it all on foreigners or Rachel Reeves, and we'll be home in time for tea. But we are peculiarly obsessed with facts, aren't we, during the 3 hours that we spend together? And I'm afraid the facts do speak to an increasing number of people, particularly young people, who just don't want to be here anymore. And I get it. I have, for the first time in my life, been contemplating the possibility of my daughters making their lives somewhere else. Happily, they will be able to do so in Ireland as a consequence of my ancestry and heritage. But I can't believe that. Even as the godfather of Remainers, the patron saint of centrist dads, the idea that I might actually not be horribly opposed to the idea of my daughters, should they so decide, and should the dice fall accordingly, making their lives or making their first steps into the adult world. One of them's already studying overseas, but I think that would have happened regardless of domestic politics. But I get it. I was thinking about it myself. I think about where I might retire. I've always intended to split my time between North Norfolk and London's fashionable Soho. I might not be able to afford to do both, of course, now that the mansion tax has kicked in, but who knows? I've always wondered that. But then you sort of thought, well, you know, if we carry on going down this nativist rabbit hole, if we look at the disasters of the last few years and think to ourselves, well, let's give those idiots another go. Let's give Nigel a chance. Let's give the liars more opportunities to mess up all of our lives, then you would find it. And I hate this because I think it is a little bit unpatriotic. I hate this because it does sort of make you think, then, well, why? At what point does my bond with my country become frayed, even broken? And you look at young people, particularly 20 to 34-year-olds, and we're talking about the low, very, very low six figures. And one of the reasons why the coverage in the usual corners of the rancid, corrupt right-wing media is going in the direction that it's going is because you can do two things. You can turn a massive fall in net migration, which you've been demanding for 10 years, somehow into a negative. And you can pretend that the reason why young people, after 14 years of Tory rule, Brexit, Truss, Boris Johnson and austerity, are deciding at very short notice, within 18 months of Labour coming, or actually, because these figures go back, what are they, March to March, the figures? So Labour had barely been in power for 6 months, apparently, when people decided that they were going to leave the country. I mean, like I said, once lying is normal, once lying is commonplace, you can't really get it out of the public discourse without some fairly violent revolutions of thought and rhetoric. So that's what they're trying to argue today. 20 to 34-year-olds are started leaving the country in their droves within 6 months of Labour getting into power, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the mess that they inherited. This isn't even an opinion, is it, really? It's just counting. The idea that Rachel Reeves has done anything since coming into power that would make this country a less attractive place to stay in if you were in that particular age group, but frankly, if you were in any, is just absurd. But we find ourselves in this extraordinary peril, really, this extraordinary, what would you call it, like a pincer movement, in that the people who are trying to fix the mess inflicted on the country by the liars and the cheats, the charlatans and the racists, are going to be blamed for the mess that the country is in. We talked about this yesterday. I mean, it is inevitable. It's really important during our time together not to actually get dispirited to a point where you think there's no purpose in pointing it out. You have to keep pointing it out. You know, Michael Gove is going to be a judge on the Orwell Prize. That, to me, is dystopian in its absurdity. The people responsible for inflicting untold untruths and appalling impacts on a country, while the quieter voices were screaming from the sidelines about where this direction of traffic would lead, continue to be rewarded and lionised. I never get bored of pointing it out to you once I start pointing it out to you. Before I come on air some mornings, I think I'll change the record, mate. But you can't change the record. That's what patriotism looks like. When people are doing damage to your country, however dispiriting it may be, however repetitive it may seem, you have to keep pointing it out. Because they will lie and lie and lie again until we are in a sort of Trumpian nightmare, which isn't necessarily that far away. So, I mean, who could really tell a young person today not to up sticks? I know we've massively reduced the number of countries they can go to. I know that by voting to abolish our freedom of movement and being told by Priti Patel to celebrate that abolition, we have massively reduced. I suspect, well, there's an interesting thing. Because if we hadn't done Brexit, then there wouldn't be anywhere near as many reasons to leave the country. We wouldn't have lost £100 billion worth of trade. We wouldn't be seeing a doubling of illegal meat coming into the country. We wouldn't be seeing everything rendered immeasurably harder when it comes to getting goods in and out of these islands. So if we hadn't done Brexit, then the country would not be a place that so many are desperate to leave, but we'd still have freedom of movement. Isn't that the most perfect conundrum of modern Britain? So the thing that we did not only made everything worse, but it also made it harder to leave. But enough people are still finding ways to leave to merit the... or to give the people who told you, I can't do it. Yes, I can. I've just said why I have to. I have to keep doing it. The people who told you to vote to become the first population in history to impose economic sanctions on itself. People who told you Boris Johnson was a genius. The people who told you Liz Truss's budget was the best thing since sliced bread. The people who told you austerity was absolutely necessary and a brilliant idea, and David Cameron absolutely had the best interests of the country at heart. All of these people. Oh, look, some foreigners over there. Let's blame them. Oh, no, sorry, that was last week. This week we're blaming... Who are we blaming? People with big families. I got my statistics wrong yesterday. 60% of the families in the catchment area of benefiting from the abolition of the two-child benefit cap are from households where that are in work. It's 40% of everyone on universal credit. 60% of the households with more than two children who qualify for the benefit cap are households where one or both parents are in work. 60%. So it's not even half of the people claiming that benefit that fit the stereotype of being unemployed. So how would you do it? Because I hate this. I don't think I can. Here's a 25-year-old, possibly very qualified. Possibly they've worked really hard to be a medical professional, or maybe they've got no skills at all, or maybe they've got manual skills. Maybe they're brilliant joiners or electricians. And I have to do this. I don't really want to do this because it means that today everybody is in agreement. Nobody is confused as to why young people in particular want to leave this country. There will be arguments. The people responsible for turning the country into what it is today will be furiously, and of course they own almost all of the platforms, they own almost all of the loud hailers, they own almost all of the newspapers, they own almost all of the broadcasters, they own almost all of the professional contributors to public discourse, and they now own almost all of the social... Well, they do own all of social media, although... well, they just do. Even the Daily Mail is running an article today about how foreign grifters are flooding our social media with complete lies about race and criminality. The Daily Mail getting on its high horse about that kind of thing. So you know that the efforts to pretend that people who've run out of patience or people who are thinking of leaving the country are running away from Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer are going to be by far the most dominant voices. As with all the other things in history, in the last 10 years of this country, the last, 15 years of this country, the story is exactly the same. It's why it's so important that some of us keep pointing it out. It's why it is exactly the same. The people who warned about what was on the horizon were proved right, and the people who called them deluded or proponents of Project Fear or, I don't know, cultural Marxists, are they still peddling that nonsense? So the people who've been proved right about everything were attacked by the people who've been proved wrong about everything, and the people who've been proved wrong about everything are still in charge of discourse, not of the government, which is why the people in charge of discourse are finally attacking the government. Things that they never did when all of the truly disastrous things were happening. Because, of course, you have to blame all the truly disastrous things on the current government, which is insane. Absolutely insane. John Major, Tory, Prime Minister, 100 billion quid. In a speech last week that nobody except us reported, as far as I can tell. Since when did we stop ignoring former Prime Ministers when they're making comments about the economic health of the entire country? So it's so weird this morning. Two things are weird. Number one, net migration has plummeted, and the people who've been demanding big falls in net migration for the last 10 years have somehow found something to be cross about. But number two, I think we can all agree, even as we argue about, it's a stupid argument, but you have to acknowledge it, even as people try to argue that 18 months of Labour trying to fix the mess is the reason why people are leaving the mess and not the 15 years or 14 years of government that created the mess. Hello? Nobody's really going to argue that the lure of emigration is louder than it's been in my adult life. The idea, I mean, early 90s, I was at university. I don't remember it being a siren call then. But the lure of emigration is arguably the loudest it's been in our lifetimes. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell a 25-year-old why they should stay here. 0345 6060 973. I don't know if that's going to work as a phone-in, because I don't know what I'd say. I don't know what I'd say. Because if you were to start talking about hope and reversal, you'd have two major problems. The first being the number of big mistakes that the Labour government has made, and the fact that it's very hard to pinpoint precisely what it stands for, because when it tells us that it stands for something, it undertakes big U-turns the next day, of which more later. And then number two is the old people are probably going to put the biggest grifter of all, or currently, according to opinion polls, the biggest grifter of them all is going to have a go at being in charge. The Farage party is leading the opinion polls. So how on earth could you say to a 25-year-old, I really think you should stay? But that's what I want you to do. 0345 6060 973. You've got a 60, just in case you ever think things aren't quite as bonkers as I portray them, you've got a 69% drop in net migration. The one thing that the grifters, the racists and the charlatans have been demanding for 10 years. Remember the callers to this programme, I don't care if it makes us poorer. I just want migration to come down. Well, it's come down. It's come down at a rate of knots no one could have believed 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Partly due to the Tories, partly due to Labour, mostly due to the fact that we've turned this place into a country that people don't want to come to unless they're absolutely desperate, which is why asylum seekers' numbers aren't falling. If you're coming here for safety and security, you don't really care about the state of the economy or anything else. If you're coming here to work, to build a life, to feel valued and respected and cherished, then you're stupid, because you won't be. You won't be valued and respected and cherished. You'll be maligned and insulted and abused. So tell me why. And I know this is an awful phone-in. I need to give it a second dimension. Tell me why you're leaving. All right, that might be easier. But what I really want to do is tell the people who are thinking of leaving why they shouldn't. 0345 6060 973. That's what I want. Okay, two ways into this. One, I think will be quite easy to do. Tell me why you're leaving and what it is about the place you're going that's better. 0345 6060 973. But what I really want is you to tell them why they shouldn't. I will have a go at that. I have to. And I might even have to do it in the context of my own family. But why? Why should people stay? 0345 6060 973. It's 10:21.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I suppose we should make it very personal, shouldn't we? 23 minutes after 10. What would you say to your own children if they were thinking of leaving the country? Leaving aside all the liars dominating political discourse, trying to pretend it's all a consequence of Rachel Reeves's budget yesterday. You have to laugh. ONS figures, I think, from March 24 to March 25, show much larger numbers than usual of people, particularly aged 20 to 34, leaving this country. And that's all the fault of what Rachel Reeves announced yesterday, apparently. But you can't argue with the fact that the country has been turned into a place that feels considerably less happy and healthy than it did in, for example, 2010, even as we were coming out of the back of a global financial crisis. Patient satisfaction in the NHS was the highest it had ever been in 2010. And then we had austerity, we had Brexit, we had Boris Johnson, we had Liz Truss. And here we are, pretending that the reason why the country has become a less attractive place to live is due to the people who've been in charge for 18 months, as opposed to the people who were in charge for the previous 14 years. Net migration comes down by at 69%, and the people who've been demanding that net migration comes down by unprecedented numbers are still cross. You cannot exaggerate the absurdity. I said yesterday that we are no longer a serious country, but you cannot exaggerate the absurdity of these situations. And I'd love to sit here and think that I set too much weight on traditional media. I set too much weight on the ludicrous positions adopted by the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph or the Daily Express or the Sun. But that's now a small beer compared to what's unfolding on your Auntie Ethel's Facebook page or your Uncle Keith's Twitter. The newspapers are getting left behind by racist lies now online, which is why the Daily Mail today is railing against racist lies online. So what would you say to your son or your daughter if they said to you, Mum, Dad, I am thinking of emigrating? What would you actually say? And remember, although we are ostensibly searching for reasons to make them stay, it's equally interesting. I mean, it is arguably more interesting why you feel you can't. You can't make that argument. What would you say to your son or your daughter if they said to you, I'm thinking of going? How would you persuade them not to? And I'm going to include the possibility of having the biggest grifter of them all in Downing Street after the next election. If the polls don't change, that's what we're looking at. A bloke who probably uniquely was a massive champion of Brexit, a massive champion of Boris Johnson, a massive champion of Liz Truss, and I presume a massive champion of austerity and a massive champion of Vladimir Putin. How do you explain to somebody with a brain how this country has ended up in a place where they're going to put a Brexit cheerleader, a Boris Johnson fanboy, a Liz Truss admirer, and a Vladimir Putin worshipper in charge of our country? Oh, but you should definitely stay, son. Sue's in Hawkhurst. Sue, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Both of my sons, early 30s, are leaving the country next year.
I'm not surprised. How do you feel? Before we do the detail, how do you feel?
Well, in one way, absolutely heartbroken. I've got two boys, and I'm coming up to late 50s, and the prospect of them not being around is very, not good. But at the same time, I'm incredibly proud of what they're doing and what they're going for, and the fact that they are not just sitting here waiting for things to change. That they can't actually impact personally. So what?
Very well put. I just need to clarify one thing before we find out what they're going to do.
Okay.
Is it possible you're an awful mum?
Oh, possibly, yeah.
And they're running away. They're both
an awful mum.
They're running away from you at 100 miles an hour, and they can't wait. And they're moving to, I don't know, Ulaanbaatar to open an Airbnb or something. What are they doing? Tell me what they're doing.
So my oldest son is married to a lovely Norwegian lady.
Oh, yes.
And she moved over here to be with him 8 years ago. They just reached the conclusion that the prospects here are just not as good as they are over in Norway. You know, I think she's missing her family. That's obviously some of it.
Of course. As will he when they go the other way. But the package on offer.
Absolutely, and he's planning to come back here once a month, once every 6 weeks anyway, because he's got lots of friends, interests here that he doesn't want to give up. But the prospects are far better in Norway than they are here.
In what worlds? What do they do? I mean, how are the prospects better? And Norway, of course, has higher taxes than here, so it's an interesting example of the counter narrative to what a lot of people will be claiming on days like today. The gulf between the rich and the poor is much smaller, and the tax burden is much higher because the public services are much better. So what is it that most attracts them economically?
I think economically, when they have a family, the benefits for parents are much better. The facilities and the services are better. My daughter-in-law has just been looking at properties over there to rent. She can get a 3-bedroomed flat within walking distance of the centre of Trondheim for the equivalent of £1,400 a month, with all bills included.
I think that is probably going to be, because I didn't know, obviously, what you were going to say when you rang in, but how funny that the first caller is talking about moving to a country with higher taxes and better benefits, when it's supposed to be the height of our taxes and the over-generosity of our benefit system that is prompting all the mythical people to leave. But property, you can't get past property, can you? No,
you can't, and it's the convenience. You know, the population of Norway is quite low, so obviously the standards of care that they show each other, the community, is so much higher. But I think it's quite difficult to get in. I mean, the fact that they've been married for a few years and she's Norwegian obviously helps.
That will help. But you can't make an argument even if you wanted to. I mean,
no, I wouldn't, because I want them to succeed in what they want to do. You know, yes, it will be heartbreaking, but you've got to be proud of them. The other son is actually going somewhere completely different.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about him, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. He's going to the Seychelles.
What's he going to do there?
Diving. So,
really?
He had a bad year where he was made redundant. And
I'm not laughing at your son being made redundant. I'm laughing at my eyesight. I thought it said driving instructor on my screen. I thought he's doing what? He's going to the Seychelles to be a driving instructor.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
No, he went travelling last year, and he's always been a bit of a water baby, and he did diving from quite an early age. But he's now going to be training to be a diving instructor. He's going to do a conservation course, and he's there for initially 6 months. But I don't see him moving back to the UK permanently.
Gosh, well, I mean, I hope you find a way to juggle this movement, because obviously keeping your mum close is one of the main reasons why people think twice about moving abroad. But as you've said yourself, you can't come up with any reasons why they shouldn't. And and I think this will be very true, oddly, and it's another reason to mention the dreaded B word, is that the more cosmopolitan, the more mobile, the more educated you are, then the more likely you are to actually be in a position to leave the country that has been turned into none of those things by... I can't keep listing them, can I? But all of the things that I list several times a day. So it will be the people that they claim to care about most, you know, the working class or the ordinary people. It's their children are going to be the least able to emigrate because of all the, international realities, the thresholds you have to reach to get over, whether they're financial or professional, whether they're looking at qualifications or savings or whatever it is, or employability. So it will once again be the people most likely to have voted for Brexit whose grandchildren are most likely to be stuck here.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I mean, the ultimate irony overload, of course, is the people moving to Dubai or similar, where you would be living under Sharia law. I said this by accident the other day. You can move to Dubai and live under Sharia law, but don't worry, because you'll still be able to log on to the Mail online and read about how awful it would be to live under Sharia law. But I don't think that that option is the one that would most appeal to people who are fleeing a country they would much rather stay in. It seems to me to be quite a greedy option, quite a greedy decision to go there, pay no taxes, live in an economy that is built on indentured labour and appalling abuses of the workforce. You just close your eyes to that, shut down your conscience and make merry. Norway would be an entirely different proposition. If you still had mobility, freedom of movement in Europe, almost every country in Europe would be an entirely different proposition. You don't have to move to a country where you have a sort of borderline domestic servitude propping up expats or immigrants, as they'd be called if it was the other way. I suppose the immigrants are the servants, the expats are the employers of servants. But for people who want to leave this country because they don't like what it's becoming, they don't like the fact that 120,000 people, can turn up at a rally organised by a racist criminal, a violent racist criminal. They don't like the fact that their street is being covered in tatty flags by men wearing balaclava helmets who climb their ladders in the middle of the night. They don't like the fact that public discourse now allows senior politicians to talk about their disquiet at seeing black faces on the streets outside their own homes. Or that you can have people complaining about brown faces in adverts going utterly unpunished by their own employers. That a man leading the opinion polls is the biggest fan of Vladimir Putin maybe the second biggest fan of Vladimir Putin ever to set foot in British politics, because, of course, his mate is currently in jail for taking bribes from a Kremlin steward. How would you do it? And it's just funny and inevitable that the people responsible for creating all of these conditions are pretending that the reasons for leaving have been caused by something and or someone else. Probably Gary Lineker and Carol Vorderman with a side order of Gary Neville. Lynn's on the Wirral. Lynn, what would you like to say?
Hiya.
Hello.
Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold.
I don't know what you sound like the rest of the time, so I never would have known unless you told me.
Okay.
All right.
No, what I want to say was just let people go, because you know, when you go abroad, it's not all sunshine and flowers that people think it's going to be. My daughter went to Australia for 3 months. She's always made the claim she wanted to go and live out there. She was out there for about 6 weeks and came home because it just wasn't what she...
Only 6 weeks? I mean, to be fair, Lynn, she could have stuck it out for a little bit longer, couldn't she?
Well, the thing is, it's what she found there. And she wasn't doing a tourist thing because she was staying with friends.
Yeah.
So, but she found the people there just didn't have the same values. They didn't care about the environment. Nobody talked about politics. And she found the overt racism in some of the ordinary areas was really too much for her.
I think we're catching them up, aren't we?
Well, yeah.
On the overt racism, I mean, I don't know where she'd go next, but I don't know non-urban Australia well at all. But we can't be that far behind. We're having big rallies in central London led by violent racist criminals, with members of my profession queuing up to say it's all perfectly normal and there's nothing to worry about at all. Yeah. But the grass is not always greener, is of course the point that you're making.
It isn't. And of course, I've got a friend whose son lives in America. He's got an American wife. Yeah. They're trying to come back over here because they've got 2 children. And basically, they're terrified for the future of the children with the current regime and, you know, all the gun violence and what have you. So I expect they'll want to come home. And I know quite a few people have gone out to places like Australia and New Zealand. They've stuck it out for a few years, but then they've come back for whatever reason. And
it may be that this when we look back at these numbers in a few years' time, this would be a bit anomalous. The problem is that it is not a country that people want to come to unless they're absolutely desperate and seeking asylum. Well, we're not making an offer anymore to people who we need.
No, and the people who are coming back are obviously from here. I've got another friend whose daughter's come back from Hong Kong because she had a child and she found the support system there. Well, there wasn't any.
Yeah, funny that, isn't it? People, when we talk about benefits, people never realise that it's them, do they? Yes, I don't know how you would get from the cradle to the grave in this country without relying or benefiting from the welfare state or the benefit system. But hey, that's the story that we're being told, and that's the story that I think we've learned over the last 10 years. Many of our friends, neighbours, colleagues, even family members are going to be keen to swallow. I think it's Rachel Reeves's uncle I read today thinks we should give Nigel a chance. Everyone's got an uncle like that. But actually, I don't, but most people have an uncle like that. Thank you, Lynn. But for balance, my friends who emigrated to Australia have all stayed there. I got 3 or 4 off the top of my head, 2 very, very close friends who are having a wonderful time and continue to have a wonderful time. And one who moved there and then moved to Canada. And we're just going to offend everybody today, and found it quite boring. So they moved back to Australia again. And I don't know Canada at all, but I probably would quite like boring. It's the only time I've ever been offered a big job in a foreign country. It was on a Canadian newspaper, but it was I had the modesty to realise I was not really up to the job that they thought that I was up to. Happily, it coincided with some other offers here, but that was the only time I thought seriously about upping sticks and changing countries. The funniest thing I've heard about Canada recently was that everybody is so nice that celebrity hunted doesn't work. Or hunted, not even celebrity hunted doesn't work. Because what happens if you're in Canada is that you turn up somewhere as the person being hunted and you just say to a random stranger, oh, I've got to get to Ontario by Sunday. And the random stranger says, oh, take my minute. I was going to try and do a Canadian accent, but you know my accents aren't great. Even people who are good at accents would struggle to do a Canadian accent, so I won't do an accent. But it's a shame I can't. If I could sort of sound a bit like Francis McDormand in the Coen Brothers film or something like that. I know that might not be Canada, but it very nearly is. Anyway, if you're on Hunted in Canada, the reason why it's not compelling television is because you go up to a random stranger in the street and you say, you couldn't possibly help me get to Ontario by Sunday, could you? And they say, oh yeah, take my minivan. My brother can drive it back next week. Everybody helps you so much that it's too easy to win on Hunted. I can't remember where I saw that, but credit to whoever I stole it from. Colin's in Liverpool. Colin, what would you say to someone thinking, well, actually, why have you rung in?
Hi, James. Good to speak again.
Likewise.
So I'm South African. I'm not sure how good you are on the South African accent. I'll cover that.
Unfortunately, the only way in which I can do a South African accent is by quoting the Spitting Image song about never having met a nice South African, and I don't think that would be either very pleasant or appropriate at this moment. Because I have. I've met you.
Yeah, a couple of times. So I emigrated from South Africa in 1999. I grew up in the 80s and the worst periods of apartheid, and saw that country almost descend into civil war. It was horrific, obviously well documented. We all know the backstory, and I left simply because of the division and hatred in the country.
Yes.
And fast forward 26 years, and I'm in the process of negotiating with my current wife, as I referred to her last time. My wife,
that went down well.
My wife to move to Spain. I'm fortunate in the position I can get a digital nomad visa, so I can bypass all of the EU problems, and go and see out the latter part of my life working over there remotely. Two reasons. I know what you're going to ask is you're big fan, Mr. Farage.
Yeah.
I will not tolerate living in a country with him as Prime Minister. Simple as, that I'm not going to do it. And then secondly, and that's obviously related to this, is the rise in racism that I've seen in the last 2 years. And as a South African, having lived through this firsthand, I can see all the signs. I know where this is going. I've heard the desperate calls of people phoning into your show and recounting stories that they've received firsthand and how they feel about it. And it moves me to tears. It's insidious. It nearly destroyed South Africa. And if we can't get a grip on it as a nation, it's going to do the same here. And the way that it's being embraced and cheered on by all the wrong people sickens me. I can't.
You're expressing
I didn't know I was going to say that.
No, What gives? This is a slightly strange question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What gives you confidence that Spain will be better?
The good question, and that's what I would say to young people. Yeah. The grass is definitely not greener on the other side. There's new challenges. There's new problems. I get that. That's the discussion I have with my wife a lot of the time. I don't think it is at the moment. That may change. But also one of the options is being in the EU again. Then I have 26 other countries to move to. I was a long time a big fan of the Netherlands. I wanted to go and live in Amsterdam. They've got their own particular set of problems they're dealing with now. I'm absolutely eyes open that I know that nowhere's going to be perfect. And I wouldn't exclude the possibility that I'll come back to the UK when we've managed to get through this little dark period that we're in.
Belch of nativist fury. I mean, that's a really interesting point. Obviously, I mean, just by a word of caution, there are parts of Spain full of expats where you'll find more Nigel Farage fans than there are in the Kremlin.
Yeah, all integrating perfectly by eating bacon and eggs and
okay. Yeah. I mean, those, again, they're all valid reasons, and they are all very, very hard to argue with, except that slightly desperate thing we can cling to, which is, don't worry, things will get better again. I wonder what you point at as the evidence of things getting better. Is it the Daily Mail today complaining about racist lies online? I mean, there's an irony to it, of course, but perhaps an early indication that even they might be realising the direction of traffic that they've been pushing the entire country in for the last 10 years, most obviously, but for much longer than that in total. 10:45 is the time. Why are you going, and why wouldn't you? Why shouldn't you? What would you say, particularly to a young person? It's the 16 to 34-year-olds, although obviously a 16-year-old leaving the country is almost certainly going with their parents, but that's the only category that you have that is measurable. 174,000 16 to 34-year-olds left the country, or if you were speaking fluent Daily Mailese, 174,000 16 to 34-year-olds fled Labour's high-tax state in the year to March, which presumably means that they spent a few months looking at what the Labour government was doing, having been absolutely ecstatic and delighted with the previous 14 years of Tory rule, and decided that up with this they could not put. So we are leaving. Because everybody knows if you're going to emigrate, it's a decision that you make in a heartbeat. I suspect, if you want to put Labour on the hook for any of these figures, I suspect it was because people cast their vote in hope, if not expectation, and realised, and how much of this you lay at the feet of Keir Starmer is up to you. I would lay more of it at Keir Starmer's feet today than I would have done a month ago, or 6 months ago, or a year ago. But we voted Labour in the hope that somehow the oil tanker could be turned around, in the hope that somehow all of the obvious awfulness inflicted upon us for a decade and a half would begin to dissipate. But then they did two things. They doubled down on the nativist rhetoric instead of resisting it. They doubled down on the anti-asylum seeker, the anti-refugee, the anti-immigrant rhetoric. Instead of addressing and explaining, they decided to join in the prioritisation of fear over fact. And they just did a very poor job of both governing and messaging. So if you were in a position to make a decision quite quickly and you voted for Labour with hope that stuff was about to get better, to paraphrase D. Ream, you didn't necessarily need that long to decide that, well, actually it isn't really getting any better, particularly on the issues that Colin just referenced. So I am going to harden my resolve to hit the road, Jack. And whether or not you come back, it's just a question of time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:51 is the time. Of course, I mean, it's understandably very hard to find, but it's something that you should probably look at before reaching the more pungent conclusions. I don't know where we would sit on an international league table in terms of tax, income tax plus employee and employer social security contributions as a percentage of labour costs. Would that be the best thing to look at? I think, because if it is, we're surprisingly low. We come in below the OECD average. Countries that have, as a percentage of labour costs, and forgive me, I might have gone to the LSE, but I'm no economist. Countries where the percentage is higher of what would go in income tax plus employee and employer social security contributions. The most recent figure I can find is from 2021. Countries where you are not going to get a better deal include Belgium, Germany, Austria, France, Italy, Slovenia, Hungary, Finland, Sweden, Portugal, Slovak Republic, Latvia, Luxembourg, the Czech Republic, Turkey, Spain, Estonia, Lithuania, Greece, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Poland, Ireland, Japan, Iceland and Canada. So that ain't the reason. Unless, listen, and it's perfectly possible I've misunderstood that. And if you can find more direct comparisons, I'd love to hear them. But the Daily Mail are adamant that people are leaving Labour's high-tax state. So unless they are not going to Belgium, Germany, Austria, France, Italy, Slovenia, Hungary, Finland, Sweden, Portugal, the Slovak Republic, Latvia, Luxembourg, the Czech Republic, Turkey, Spain, Estonia, Lithuania, Greece, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Poland, Ireland, Japan, Iceland or Canada, then that is simply not true. Countries they could be going to. Australia comes in lower. That's a popular destination. The United States, I mean these are relatively tiny variables. Costa Rica looks nice this time of year. Switzerland, that sometimes appears. So that, you know, there are some below us, but unless everybody's going to the United States, Costa Rica, Australia, Israel, Korea, Switzerland, Mexico, New Zealand, Chile or Colombia, then I'm afraid that the narrative of everybody leaving because of taxes is a lie. Oliver's in Hounslow. Oliver, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Yes, I lived abroad for 15 years and I made the decision to move back to the UK in 2024. I had a good life.
You picked your moment.
Yeah, it was a great choice just before the election. So, unexpected.
And what can we learn from you? What message what have you taken away from that experience?
I think the first message is that I think the UK is in a much better place than many people think. I think there's a lot of the news, a lot of the headlines, a lot of the conversations since I've been back, a lot of friends who moved back with me in a similar time frame, focus on the negativity, but actually we are in a better place. I lived in China for 15 years and have friends, expats all over the world, and much of the world want to come to the UK. Like, why do we have so many people who want to come here? Why do we have so many issues? It's because the UK is a very attractive place culturally, business-wise, billions of people speak our language, and there is a lot of interest.
Yeah, but we are undoing most of that. I mean, we can't undo the popularity of the English language across the globe, but we are making it a less attractive place to do business by making it harder to hire people, making businesses, making it much harder for businesses to do business by dint of coming out of the single market and the customs union. Rachel Reeves, of course, has to go after businesses in a desperate attempt to raise some of the money to plug some of the holes that she inherited, but that adds to the potential difficulties of coming here to do business. And until relatively recently, the argument that we must be doing something right because so many people want to come here was irresistible, but they don't anymore, mate. You can come back, but the numbers of people who actively want to come here because they quite like the look of what they would be able to do with their lives is plummeting. Sorry.
Well,
I just rained on your chips.
Well, no, I mean, my point is, I set my own business. I work with investment from Asia coming to the UK. I was in Cornwall the other day, looking at investment, bringing international investment into parts of the UK. So, there is a lot of interest in terms of investment. Like, in terms of, the points that you mentioned, I understand that people want to leave, but everybody's, considering leaving. So, in terms of setting up a business, I have my own business. It is challenging. But I still see opportunity to bring foreign investment, I'm with
you. I'm with you. I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate because who is doing that? Who is actually describing Britain as a brilliant place? Who is reminding us? I mean, I do it with London because that is where I live, and I see some extraordinary. I know. I'm just one little person in the great scheme of things, but look, the way they've lied about London, including British politicians, sort of latter-day Lord Haw-Haws, claiming that their American friends, some dreadful reform woman claiming that her American friends in cities where, DC, for example, you're 26 times more likely to get murdered than you are in London, but they're claiming that London is the place that people don't want to come to. It is extraordinary how these people talk down their own country, and no one really, with the exception of London, no one really challenges that.
No, I find it shocking because, I was living in that ecosystem, as a British expat living overseas, you can be in Asia, Australia, Middle East. The conversations are the UK is a terrible place to live. But look at social media, all these things. But you come back, I came back.
Well, that's what Lord Haw-Haw used to do during the war, isn't it? He used to tell foreigners that the UK was terrible and that it deserved to disappear under the Nazi jackboot. And now you've got bots galore and, of course, some actual public figures and politicians doing exactly the same thing. And it works because these social media accounts reach parts that other people cannot reach.
I think it does work. I come back personally. I've had a great year. I've been involved in local charity, involved in local volunteering. Met great people, and that narrative of a country in decline. I think there are some elements that doing business here, living here, is difficult, but it's not. I don't. Based on my experience, come back. I don't.
No, I love you, and I'm glad you were listening, and I'm very glad that you called in. I mean, in many ways, the problem we have is a graph, and the graph will show decline, and you measure the decline. You don't measure where you sit now and compare it to where other people are sitting, where other countries are sitting, and of course, the people who have absolutely visited the decline upon us are so desperate to avoid responsibility for what they've done that they will point the finger at anybody. It was foreigners, and then it was poor children from poor families that haven't been born yet. That was yesterday. Today it's Rachel Reeves's fault that people are leaving a country that inflicted all sorts of horrors upon them against their will and has become measurably more racist in the last 2 years. It's all Rachel Reeves's fault that they're leaving the country. It's not the fault of the outlets, the politicians, the organisations or the parties that have done all these terrible things to us. But we're still, and that's what I want. That's a peculiarly British form of patriotism. Things might be a bit rubbish at the moment, but it's still the best place to live. Oh, hang on. It literally is. Forbes magazine, I think for the 11th consecutive year, has just judged London to be the best place in the world to work, live and visit. And I know it's expensive. And yes, people's phones get stolen. But by every available metric, for Forbes magazine, London is the best place in the world to work, live and visit. To which the response will sometimes be, oh yeah, that's fine if you're rich. But remember, it's supposed to be the rich people that don't want to come here because they're going to get their £500,000 watch stolen if they start tooling around Knightsbridge with the sleeves rolled up. So the liars, the racists, the charlatans, the grifters, the frauds, the fakers, they try and have their cake and eat it on a daily basis. Forbes magazine says London is the best place in the world to be. Yeah, but that's just rich people. Why is London such a terrible place? Oh, because rich people can't walk around without worrying about their jewellery being stolen. Didn't Farage say that? Walk around the West End with jewellery on? No one does it anymore. I've been out in the West End a lot lately because I'm very blessed to get invited to first nights. I'll tell you what, I'd take it over any other city in the world, probably until the day I die. But persuading young people that it's worth staying here is a rather different proposition.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I somewhat unexpectedly, how interested are you in the sort of view from the studio? Do you give a monkeys about that? I mean, I had an encounter many years ago with a radio consultant. She was absolutely wonderful, actually. Gave me huge head starts in this business. One of the things she told me that I think I might disagree with is that you're not remotely interested in what's going on in the studio. So if I start complaining about the air conditioning or something like that, I think that's true when you're new. And obviously you may be listening to this for the first time. We've had record-breaking numbers of the first-time callers in the last few weeks. But I think am I right in thinking you quite like it? I mean, there are so many different types of listeners. There are people who pay more attention to this nonsense than I do. There are certainly people who pay more attention to it than my so-called colleagues do, who I'm currently looking at. And there are people who zone in and out. There are people who tune in for very masochistic reasons. People who hate every syllable that comes out of my mouth but are drawn to me. Like bees to honey. That doesn't quite work, does it? Like pollen, like a bee to pollen. I'm the pollen, you're the busy bee. You can tell that from the number of people applying into Idiot's Corner every day. But but what would you call it? The in-house gossip, the in-house, and also then the Wizard of Oz moments, where I pretend that I'm Toto the dog and I start yapping endearingly and pull back the curtain so that you can see what's actually going on here. And listen, how many times have I also said to you, the easiest thing to do in this job is to make the phones ring. I listen to young producers and I feel like a wise old bird. Did that get calls, they say to each other. Did that get calls? How did that do? Did that get calls? And I sit there thinking, you only need 2 good calls. OK, so I've got the busiest switchboard in the country, so it's a position of smugness from which I speak. Some radio stations phone up people who haven't rung in to the show, who've texted in, and then suddenly their phone rings. They go, hello? And they'll get a producer on the other end and say, can I persuade you to come on the breakfast show? Other radio stations do this. And I find it extraordinary. Under my glorious rule, I would ban that immediately. Absolutely, because that's what they're paying us to do. If it's a phone-in station, then we are being paid to make people engaged and interested enough to phone in. Like a moth to a flame, says Stu. Colin uses a rather less flattering analogy that I suspect might have popped into your mind as well. But I think sometimes you quite enjoy it. I won't overdo it, but I never know. So that conversation in the last hour did not float your boat for about 20 minutes. Well, actually, my introduction was 20 minutes. By 5:30, the switchboard was on fire. 26 minutes past, it wasn't. Why? What happened? To go from 0 to 60 in 2 minutes flat? I don't know. But the level of interest now in the conversation about the attractiveness or otherwise of this country has rocketed again. So I'm going to stay with it for a little bit longer, with a side order of Oliver in Hounslow. And how would you talk this country up? Again, that breaks all the rules of this genre. Give me a ring and tell me why you're miserable. That's what you're supposed to do. Last week we did, give me a ring and tell me what you'd really like more money in the budget to be spent on. When what you're supposed to do in budget week, actually we did it this week, I think we did it on Monday. What you're supposed to do in budget week is give me a ring and tell me why you shouldn't be paying any more tax. And that's very popular because you can get queues around the block of people ringing in to tell you why they shouldn't be paying any more tax. And what you mustn't do is ask them how they expect to pay for everything from the old age pension to the army to the police service to the roads to the NHS to the... we could go on. Just don't ask them that. Just ask them how certain they are that they shouldn't be paying any more tax. Yes, I should not be paying... But instead saying, what would you like to spend more money on? And the list is almost endless. And what was quite gratifying about Monday's show was the number of callers who focused upon people other than themselves. What do you think we should be spending more money on? Not me. mostly young people. And it was that sense of young people getting dealt a particularly poor hand of cards at the moment that popped into my mind when I read today about the number of 16 to 34-year-olds, 174,000 16 to 34-year-olds now leaving the country because young people are getting a particularly rubbish deal. They have done for some time now in this country. The triple look on the pension is one of the reasons why you end up top-loading the system. But it is a particularly rubbish deal. We've said so for ages. You can't afford a house, 0 hours contracts, all of the things we've been wanging on about for 14 years, suddenly everybody's agreeing with because they can pretend that it's all Rachel Reeves's fault. So how do we talk the country up, which flies in the face of how you're supposed to do this job? Give me a ring and tell me why you're miserable. But I'm afraid Oliver gave my head a wobble there. He actually reminded me that that's what we're supposed to do. I love living here, even now, even with all the problems, all the things that have been done to us by David Cameron and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dean Dorries and Nigel Farage, all of them, all of the terrible things that they've done to us, while trying to blame it on foreigners or single mothers or unborn children of poor people, or latterly, of course, Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer. Unimpressive so far in government. Don't make any bones about it, but anywhere near as bad as what went before? Do me a flipping favour. Honestly, give your head a wobble. Forbes magazine telling London the very, very best place to live in the world is here. For 7, 8, 9 years running. It's not a coincidence, it's not an accident. Politicians queuing up, social media liars and racists queuing up to say London is a war zone or it's unsafe, we're about to introduce Shakira law. It's madness. You can't stop pushing back. Why not? Because you're patriotic. Whatever that means. You're patriotic. You love this place. The idea that it is hobbled by anything other than political decisions taken by the right wing in this country for a decade and a half is obviously and demonstrably stupid. It's absurd. It's dishonest. It's hideous. But you look me in the eye and tell me that those voices aren't still the loudest in public discourse. What did we point out yesterday? 2 of Liz Truss's biggest fanboys still getting paid by the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph to analyse Rachel Reeves's budget. I mean, why wouldn't you trust someone who said it was the finest budget in the history of budgets? Why wouldn't you trust someone who said it was the finest budget since 1986? Why on earth wouldn't you trust someone who was so busy blowing smoke up Liz Truss's fundament after she brought the country to the brink of economic disaster? Why on earth wouldn't you trust them to tell you what happened in yesterday's budget? There's a very, very long line of people still getting paid for their economic analysis, despite having told you that Liz Truss was a genius, that Brexit would make you richer, that Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy, and that austerity was the perfectly correct response to an international global crisis, based, of course, upon the presumption that it was caused by there being too many Sure Start centres in Sunderland, which is, I should stress, an adaptation of an Alexei Sale joke about libraries in Wolverhampton. So let's talk it up a little bit. So the 3 questions now on the board. Why would you leave, or indeed are you leaving? What would you say to a young person thinking of doing so in order to persuade them to stay? And attendant upon that second question comes the third one, which is, should we just remind each other why this is a wonderful place to live? I'm just going to ring a few texters. See if they want to come on the programme. So you talk among yourselves for a while. Max is in Coventry. Max, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
so, sorry, I'm very anxious.
You're also very young. You're also, what, 20 years old, 19?
Yeah, I'm 20.
Do you know how I know? Do you know how I know that?
Your producer, I imagine.
No, it's much more clever than that. It's because you opened your conversation by saying so.
I do that quite a lot.
Everyone your age does that, and nobody my age does it. So there we are. Carry on, Max. What made you pick up the phone? You're doing brilliant.
I'm currently at the University of Warwick in my 3rd year of my history degree.
Yes.
And one of our modules is focuses on Britain in the 1970s.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I would... I'm thinking that no active plans, but I don't necessarily want to stay here, is political patterns.
Yes.
So in the 1970s, a lot of what we are looking at is the perceptions of decline.
Yes.
In the first half of the 1970s, Britain has quite a lot of inflation, etc., etc. But in the latter half, it has actually, if you were to look at it relatively statistically, and there is a lot of fabulous articles on this that we've been reading, has mostly recovered, yet the perceptions of decline stay prominent. And one of the ways this is done through is, say things like Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. There's a lot of letters that were written to him.
Oh, I've seen them, yes.
Yeah, they expose quite an interesting sentiment that I see mirrored at the moment. And that sentiment carries on into, say, Thatcher being elected.
Tell us what it is. Tell us what that sentiment is, because those letters are absolutely fascinating. I researched some of them for my last book, actually. So go on.
It's a sense of cultural decline, effectively rooted in racism, especially to do with immigration. And it results in a political shift, not only of a continued perception of decline in the 1970s, but it's also been a relative political consensus. If you were to look at the Labour Party in 1997, they were talking about how they wouldn't go back to the 1970s. It's a conception that became consensus. And if the mirror images that I'm seeing at the moment between, say, Powell and Farage, for example, if that is to be maintained, there's very little chance of us coming back from this politically, potentially, and that's what concerns me. It's that the political shift to the right that then becomes consensus continues going further, and I don't necessarily want to stay in a country where that is going to be the case. As well as, other countries like Norway that was brought up earlier, having much better opportunity.
Much harder to get into than some people may realise. But of course, the more employable you are, the more attractive you become to a new home, to a new country. That's always been the case. Two things, Max. The first thing, I'm never going to forgive you for.
Okay.
Because you've come on as a history student and explained that you're studying an era when I was alive. So thanks for that, mate. That's a real boost on a Friday morning.
Yeah, our professor said pretty similar. Matthew Thompson, he's brilliant. Yes. He was born in 1968, I think.
Anyway, he's a little bit older than me. But of course, these are very important points. And the second point is that there's an air of inevitability in what you describe. History is famously cyclical. And we are in a very familiar cycle of blaming immigrants for what if net migration continues to plummet at the rate that it's plummeting? Does that change anything, or are we too far gone for fact to reach the feelings?
I don't think it does matter, because this is another point that we're looking at in this module, that every time one point where decline is being effectively talked about, whether it's real or not, as soon as that area of decline ends, they just move on to the next one. So they go from, say, inflation to borrowing when it came to the economy, for example. So inflation's too high, now borrowing's too high. It just moves and moves and moves. So I don't know if you can really combat it particularly well.
How long? The thing in the news bulletin there about France intercepting so-called small boats coming across the English Channel. If you look at the net migration figures now and the number of people who, like you, are increasingly wondering whether this is a country where they want to spend the next few years, given the direction of political and largely racist traffic, how long will it be before they recognise the desperate need for more incomers in order to not just do the jobs that are currently being done by people born overseas, but the jobs that would previously be done by the young people that are leaving? How long before they start complaining about the French intercepting small boats because there are asylum seekers and we need them?
I don't think they will, because it works on the assumption. So one half of my family, unfortunately, are relative Faragists and reform supporters, and the other half, thankfully, isn't. And my dad will probably be listening, so hello. But yeah,
hi, Dad.
Yeah. One of the common things that they have is whenever I bring up, say, that the need for immigration is, but we could just train people here to do these jobs. And the problem is that training people here to do those jobs, A, requires them to want to stay here, and B, it requires the birth rate to not be declining. So we've both got simultaneously a declining birth rate, and also, the people who are young and say, well, anywhere up until however old you want to say, we're wanting, we're not seeing any reason necessarily to stay here. So you can't just train us to do these jobs, because we're not many of us are going to want to stay.
It's the worst of all possible worlds, isn't
definitely,
it?
I'd say so.
Ah, lordy. And of course, it's compounded by the fact that the national discourse, and this was also true in the 1970s, I suspect it's worse now. Daily Mirror was still a powerhouse in the 1970s. There was still a sort of left-wing media to speak of, and we didn't have social media. So if you're hoping to reach people who believe things that aren't true, you've probably got less chance of doing it now than you did in the 1970s.
Yeah, I agree. I do think in some ways it was worse. It is worse now, sorry, I should say. It's just something I don't really see changing. And then another point I'd like to make quickly, if I can,
is... Of course you can, you're doing brilliant.
On the point of, obviously I can't speak on having to convince anybody to stay here, but what my parents might say in response.
Yes.
So my dad, who is listening, he has postured moving to, say, Norway. So he would probably agree with me. He'd probably sigh and go, yeah, no, I understand why you don't want to stay here. Whereas my mum, who this is I think, an interesting contradiction.
Yeah.
She, obviously, as I said, her half of the family relatively reform supporting. She would simultaneously believe the conception that the country is in uncontrolled decline, mainly culturally due to immigration, but then would also simultaneously argue, why would I possibly want to leave because Britain is so great? And it's a contradiction of patriotism or nationalism of this country is so amazing, but also simultaneously it's being destroyed. And I can't quite get my head around that.
Well, is it not just a case of two things being true at the same time? Well, they think it's being destroyed, but the more you think there is to destroy, the more that the second phenomenon kicks in.
I think that could be the case. I think because they think it's so great that there is, as you said, more to destroy. I think that's a very
So there's three constituents, because I think it's great, and I don't think it's being destroyed. I think it's being destroyed by the people persuading people like your mum's side of the family that it's being destroyed.
Completely agree.
And there's proof in the Daily Mail today how so many, of all places, Max, and I don't know where this fits into your 1970s parallels, how so many of the fake images fomenting racial division in Britain were made by foreign trolls to get rich. The Daily Mail is complaining today about racist lies persuading British people to be frightened of things that don't exist. I honestly, I never thought this day would dawn, and if I did, I didn't think it would dawn yet. But how that could, I mean, how do people like you get dissuaded from the course of action that you're on is the answer that I think the question that neither of us can answer. Do you know what you want to do?
What, in terms of a job or moving country?
No, either. But remember, your dad's listening, so don't say anything that you're going to regret being brought up at Christmas.
He already knows.
No, okay.
I intend to, go into history, effectively, write articles, books.
So do
journals,
I. Oh, no, hang on. I intend to go down in history. Sorry. They're not the same thing at all.
I want to write about it.
Good for you.
Yeah, but in terms of staying in the country, obviously I've not sat here thinking about exact moves that I'd make, but there is nothing motivating me to stay here. So, and
that is a terrible thing, and it is not your fault, and it is certainly not Rachel Reeves's, but hey-ho, on we go. Thank you, Max. That was a brilliant call, and I suspect that you are a brilliant historian because your ability to marshal the facts and articulate the interpretations of those facts is spectacular. It really is, and I'm sure your dad is and your mum, quite rightfully, very proud of you, but it is a crying shame that you don't currently feel that this country is a place where you could make your way, and I don't know who it will be that the people in the backs of our minds during conversations like this would blame for that, but I hope none of them would even dream of blaming you. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Isaac writes, I hope you've got a new topic lined up for after the next junction, James, because Max has just smashed this one out of the park.
James O'Brien on LBC.
OK, 23 minutes after 11. I think I've just stumbled across the stupidest thing Kemi Badenoch has ever said. And should we try and find the audio of it before I tell you, or should I tell you now? I mean, admittedly, that's a very sweeping statement, and indeed a very bold one, because there is so much competition. And, of course, the competition grows every time she opens her mouth. But I think I've just stumbled across, and I'm just triple-checking that everything is above board and Bristol, ship-shape and Bristol fashion, before someone's going to ask that next week, aren't they, on Mystery Hour? Someone's going to say, where does the phrase ship-shape and Bristol fashion come from? I think it's because the ship leaving Bristol would have been in peak condition. So to be ship-shape and Bristol fashion means that you're box fresh. I don't know why that happens. Why am I talking about Bristol fashion being a latter-day synonym for box fresh? Anyway, I think I've found the stupidest thing Kemi Badenoch have ever said, and it's rather agreeably seasonal. So I will wait until we found the audio, and I'll see whether you can spot the reasons, 2 reasons at least, why it is so spectacularly stupid. 24 minutes after 11 is the time. 174,000 people aged 16 to 34, many of whom at the bottom end of the scale, of course, will be moving with their family, left the country in the year to March. People getting their knickers in a twist about that figure do not know how many will come back, of course, but it's a notable figure. It's one way in which you can pretend that you haven't been spending the last 10 years demanding that net migration comes down. What do you think massive falls in net migration look like? Why do you think the word net appears in that phrase? It's because you count people coming in and you count people going out, and whatever you're left with is net migration. So if you spent 10 years demanding that net migration comes down, and today you're being told to be angry about an entirely different phenomenon or statistic, it's probably time to wonder why you're still listening to these people. But 174,000 is a notable figure. And it just struck me this morning, if you're just tuning in, that the attempts to blame it on Rachel Reeves are objectively hilarious. Because the reasons to leave this country at the moment have next to nothing to do with her, and almost everything to do with what went on for a decade and a half before she got anywhere near Downing Street. But how would you persuade somebody to stay? 0345 60 60973. How would you? What should I say if my daughter turns to me in a few years' time and says, "I think I'm going to stay on here after graduating. I don't really want to come back to a Britain that has." That looks like it's going to put a massive Kremlin-worshipping racist in charge of the economy. I think, I mean, she's a bit more intelligent than that. She'd choose longer words. She takes after her mum. But what would you say to somebody thinking of settling in, say, I don't know, Norway? We've heard a lot about this morning, but you could... And remember, taxes and benefits are higher in most of these countries. So that ain't the reason why they're leaving. John's in Wimborne. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think this is going to be one of those calls where you counter all my feelings with some glorious facts.
God forbid. Perish the thought.
And I'm probably going to be one of these people who just need to give their head a wobble. But, I mean, I have a young family with a son, and we're seriously considering emigrating to Sweden and taking part of our business over to Sweden. I'm a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, and I feel... steadily betrayed by each government that comes along. I feel like I swim in a cesspool of... It's a feeling. It is a feeling, because like my life is extremely good. I own my own house. I own a business. I'm healthy. Life is good, but I don't like the vitriol and the I'm really struggling to find the words. I'm a little bit nervous.
Oh, you're doing brilliantly. I mean, think about this for a minute, will you? You've served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and you're nervous talking to me.
That's one of the... Afghanistan... It's the lack of accountability, I think, I'm really struggling with for our political leaders. I don't like being led. I'm really struggling with our leadership. We
haven't got much at the moment.
Well, this is it, and I don't want to be in a leaderless country. I feel politically homeless, which is a phrase that gets used a lot on your programme.
Yeah, no, that's because it's true. It's because it's real. And just if I help you in a bit, if I may, I think what you're describing is the same malaise that many other callers have described, but you've added an extra dimension in that the government that we elected at the last election came to power with many of us believing that it would start pushing back against the vitriol that you're describing and start actually challenging the narratives that so many of us find so disgusting, and they haven't. They simply haven't.
There was last night I watched. I'm more than happy to move to a country that pays more tax. I can, you know, it's not even about money. It's about. I watched Beth Rigby interview Rachel Reeves, and the way she sort of swallowed and clenched her teeth and danced around the fact that she has put up taxes for working people, whatever that means.
Sure.
I just want people to be honest, and I'm sick to death of the lack of honesty and accountability. I feel ashamed, James, to have served this country. Our Afghanistan, we just gave it back to the Taliban, where Matey Boy was on holiday.
And we're now in America. They're now going to just start deporting people who actually fought against the Taliban alongside US troops after this terrible shooting in DC. I don't know what I mean. In many ways, you're the person that I want to persuade, or that I want other callers to persuade to stay, but it's going to be very hard to do, except that political cycles are short. I mean, this is not necessarily the most uplifting thing you're going to hear all day, but I don't personally think that Keir Starmer will lead Labour into the next general election, and although it's an enormous burden to place on anybody's shoulders, and I may change my mind about that, don't forget that the space you and I see is huge. It's empty, but it's still huge. That space to push back, that country we were in, say, 2012, it's a bit of a cliche to talk about the Olympics opening ceremony, but it speaks to a spirit, doesn't it? The kind of spirit that sometimes you may even carry all the way to war.
Yeah, I mean, it's the... Yeah, I mean, I don't know. If reform get in, if Nigel Farage becomes the Prime Minister, I will sell up and move. And I'll take my family with me. And that will be the final straw.
And the demographics are inarguable. I mean, the people most likely to do that will be the people who make the biggest contributions to this country, apart from the incredibly rich people that are now dropping money in his collection plate. I think the owner of JCB had Boris Johnson living in his garden not long ago. Other rich people have peacocks, but the owner of JCB had Boris Johnson living in his garden so he could point him out to dinner guests. But it will be people like you. It will be. It won't be old age pensioners who aren't paying much tax who leave the country. It will be people like you who leave the country. Everything will get worse. But everything's got worse at every point where those people have won the argument. It got worse after Brexit. It got worse after austerity. It got worse after Truss. It got worse after Johnson. And yet they're minded to give it another go.
And I can't keep. I feel I can't keep my family on this treadmill of. It's one. It's I feel like I'm trapped behind a mirror. You're like screaming at the country. Are you actually insane? Like, it's one idiot after another, and people keep buying it, laughing. I live in a lovely little countryside in Dorset, and everywhere I go there's these tripping paintings on roundabouts. I'm like,
what is this? What have we become? What have we become?
I don't know, and I don't want to be part of it anymore. I want off.
That's a tragedy, actually, not just because of your service for the country and that sense that your country's not giving you anything back, but because of what it says about loads and loads of people who aren't in exactly the same situation as you, but are in a situation that's similar enough. And I need to try harder. I need to work harder. I don't want people like John to leave the country. I need to do... Well, I mean, really, you need Keir Starmer to make a better fist of telling them why they should stay, telling him why he should stay. And it doesn't matter that the usual people are telling lies about why people are going, pretending that it's to do with Rachel Reeves's budget. It doesn't matter that people are leaving the country because of what was done previously. If Labour were going to be the answer to these problems, or at least the beginning of a solution to them, then they have failed as well. That's not an opinion. It's counting.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34 is the time. So by popular demand, the stupidest thing, I think, and listen, would it be unfair to open up the text lines for challenges to this? I think it's the stupidest thing that Kemi Badenoch has ever said. I mean, it challenges the idea that she became working class when she got a job briefly at McDonald's. So she became working class the moment because that didn't sound really stupid. It just sounded, what? So ignorance is different from what? What's the word we use to describe things that make you go, what? That's not stupid, is it? It's just like monumentally out of touch, deluded. What's the difference between stupid and deluded? I don't know, really. But Kemi Badenoch is very good at both. And on this occasion, I think she's done stupid. Okay, bit of homework for you. Inspired by Max in Coventry, the history undergraduate, who we were all so impressed by. Can you spot at least 2 major flaws? I mean, I've got 3 off the top of my head without even thinking about it. But can you spot 1, 2, 3 or more reasons why this is one of the stupidest things you've ever heard?
Is it unchristian to expect the state to do what your family or your household or your wider community should do for you?
Well, I mean, in early Christian times, there was no states or welfare. So I think that you can argue that, actually.
Okay. So it's the blitheness with which she says it, isn't it? It's in early Christian times. So, I mean, most obviously in the Roman Empire, there was no state or welfare. Can you spot the $1 million question? That's Nick Robinson on his podcast Political Thinking. And to be fair, I don't know whether or not he did come back with this question, so I don't want to suggest that he didn't. But can you spot the question that he should have come back with immediately? Can you, like literally, the one that might have made even her go, I've just done another one of those gaffes that I never do. Have another listen to it and see. And I'm just going to refresh my screen to see, because there is one simple question that you come back with at this point, which I think it would possibly even pierce her extraordinary carapace of confidence. Is that the correct pronunciation of the word carapace? I've been meaning to try it out on the show for a while. It's not carapace, is it? Although that does sound appropriately Latin. Carapace, is that the right word? Anyway, listen to this and see if you can come back with the absolutely killer question. And there's a clue in that killer question, all right? What do you come back with to the leader of the actual opposition, who, I know I go on about it, but somebody has to. The right-wing newspapers are now saying she's playing a blinder, she's doing brilliantly. Do you know what? Whisper it quietly, but she could be the next Prime Minister. Just wait to see whether the Daily Mail is allowed to buy the Daily Telegraph and then see which way they split the vote. Like, one paper will come out for Badenoch, the other paper will come out for Farage, if she's still in the job, which is still far from certain. But what is the question that you come back with in response to this extraordinary statement from this truly extraordinary politician?
Is it unchristian to expect the state to do what your family or your household or your wider community should do for you?
Well, I mean, in early Christian times, there was no states or welfare. So I think that you can argue that, actually.
Okay. Who crucified Jesus? That's it. That's the question. Okay, who crucified Jesus? And then she'd go, well, it was the... Okay, I got another one for you. And I nearly said something stupid at this point. Because see if you can guess what words I nearly said at the end of this. In fact, I did say them to Eleanor, but I caught myself before she started laughing at me. Why did they go to Bethlehem? And I said, don't laugh. All right, you can laugh a bit. I said, why did they go to Bethlehem at Christmas? And then I said very quickly, well, obviously it wouldn't have been Christmas then. So the leader of the opposition thinks that there was no state, the Roman Empire, to which you respond immediately by saying, well, who crucified Jesus then? And then you say, if she manages to wriggle out of that, which, spoiler alert, she wouldn't be able to, you then say, why did they go to Bethlehem at the time of year that later became known as Christmas? And the answer, of course, was for a census. So who on earth wanted a census back in there was no state pre-Christian times? I think, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, because you always flipping do, I think certainly centurions got pensions. I think the Roman Empire had a pension system. I mean, again, I'm open to correction on that. But you could also I make a case for saying that they had a welfare state. They gave cash for poor children. And if you know your Coriolanus, or indeed your Shakespeare, you'll know that they subsidised grain for poor workers. The state would provide cheaper grain for poor workers, plebs, as we were called back then. So listen again to this quite extraordinary intervention. But what I want you to note, because in some ways Keir Starmer has the opposite problem, and it's still a problem. Keir Starmer is authoritative and knowledgeable, but sounds as if he isn't when he's talking. Kemi Badenoch is, I mean, you own furniture that's more knowledgeable than she is, but she sounds as if she is, because, of course, as we know, she does these mantras in front of the mirror. She does the stuff where you go, you are a wonderful person. You are. Have a listen to this.
Is it unchristian to expect the state to do what your family or your household or your wider community should do for you?
Well, I mean, in early Christian times, there was no states or welfare. So I think that you can argue that, actually.
So who crucified Jesus if there was no state or indeed no Roman Empire? Why did they go to Bethlehem for a census that was being conducted by a state that didn't exist? And who was subsidising the grain or providing the pensions or indeed giving what the Daily Mailus, Deus Maelius, would have described in ancient Rome as handouts for poor children? In fact, that's what yesterday was about. They had handouts for poor children in ancient Rome. But when Rachel Reeves introduces it, it's evidence that the budget is un-Christian because... Oh, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know. What don't you know? I don't know anything. I don't know anything anymore. How can that woman still be leader of a major political party? Clinton's in Exeter. Clinton, can you remember why you rang in?
First-time caller here, so a little bit nervous.
Well, I'm not surprised, especially after that introduction. Well, let's steer us back from the days when there were censuses, crucifixions, pensions and handouts for poor children, but no state whatsoever, to the state that we're in now and why you've had enough of it. What would you like to say?
So firstly, I used to find it quite difficult to listen to you. Actually, really enjoy listening to you now, so just wanted to thank you after reading your book.
Happens to everybody in the end, Clinton, but, better late than never. Go on.
So I previously lived in New Zealand and Australia for 4 years. I'm 39 now. I was 28 at the time when I moved. I've kind of got to a point where I'm sort of looking to move again. The problem I've got really is being 39 and not falling into the 16 to 34 age bracket of the figures that you've discussed. It makes things a lot harder for me.
And it does what? Because it's literally harder to get visas, or you've just got more to arrange and more logistics to deal with?
Well, I would imagine a lot of the 16 to 34-year-olds are going on a working holiday visa to some of the Commonwealth countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand.
That was completely missing from all of the analysis today, including mine, is that there is no breakdown of how many of these people were planning to stay out of the country permanently and how many were doing the pre-planned shorter-term trips, which have been commonplace forever, of course, but which are a little bit harder now because we voted to abolish freedom of movement.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to know what the figures were in previous years for 16 to 34s, or is this just a right-wing media? No, they're definitely higher. They've definitely gone. They've definitely gone up by quite a lot, and I'm not surprised, frankly, because of the reasons why you're keen to hit the road are not reasons that necessarily applied 10 or 20 years ago. Yeah. Exactly that. I mean, another thing I wanted to talk about is when you mentioned earlier about as a parent, what would you say to your... When I actually told my dad what I wanted to do, he said, well, first thing he said, why are you still here? I told you to do this years ago.
But he thought you would be coming back.
He encouraged me to... Well, I wouldn't say encouraged me to come back. He sort of encouraged me to stay as long as I possibly could. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for me in the end.
Well, I was going to ask that. You don't have to answer the question. Why did you come back?
I couldn't stay. I didn't have the right job qualifications. I didn't have anything that I could offer Australia to stay or New Zealand to stay. So it made things quite difficult. I've now come back and I'm in a better position where I can potentially move, but it's not. I don't think it's as easy as what people are making out to be. It's not a case of just picking your life up and moving it to a different country, especially now after we've left the EU.
No, well, the callers I've spoken to have clearly done their homework and are aware of the big wrench that it would be and the difficulties that it would involve. But that figure of 174,000 will, of course, include, I presume, a relatively high proportion of people who are not planning on staying away permanently. So then you split them into two categories. You split them into the category of people who would have gone anyway at any point in history, because young people, particularly educated, skilled young people, have been doing this since time immemorial. And then the second category of people who probably wouldn't have done it if this country wasn't in such a state. And therefore they've decided to have a slightly bigger look at their options and have realised what options are open to them. It's about how mobile and transferable your skill set is a lot of the time, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. I think you've hit the nail pretty much on the head there.
I hope so. I mean, if you're going to blame it on Rachel Reeves and call it a brain drain, you're actually nodding or knocking at a similar door. But, of course, you're not taking any responsibility whatsoever for the reason why skilled professionals are more likely to hit the road, and more likely, as you've reminded us, and we needed you to remind us of this, more likely to be welcomed with open-ish arms by the country to which you want to move. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I hope I don't upset anybody, but if your skill set involves painting roundabouts in a rough approximation of the St. George's flag, then I very, very much doubt that New Zealand or Australia, or indeed anywhere else, is going to be rushing for your signature on the visa form.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:49 is the time. I mean, look, I said even by her standards it was an intervention of quite startling stupidity, but the idea that Jesus would be opposed to a welfare state. When he said that it was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it was for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, what do you think he was calling for? I mean, I'm not addressing Kemi Badenoch directly at this point, but if you do see her later today, perhaps you could ask her this question. And remember, if you see Nigel Farage, ask him if Nathan Gill, the man who took bribes from a Kremlin stooge to parrot Kremlin propaganda, ask him if Nathan Gill ever said anything about Russia that he, Nigel Farage, disagrees with. That is the question I'd love him to be asked. In the same way I wish someone had said to Kemi Badenoch when she said that there was no state in early Christian times who actually crucified Jesus. Because I was always under the impression that it was the, quotes, state, end quotes. But what else would you offer up as evidence of this being the stupidest thing she's ever said? Welfare spending is unchristian. So when Jesus said that it was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, probably talking about some statuary in ancient Judea rather than an actual eye of an actual needle, but that's by the by. I don't know why I know this. Well, I do. I did an A-level in it because I was taught by monks and I had to. But the message I've always understood there, when he says it would be easier for a camel to pass through an eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, I always thought that meant that Jesus was quite heavily opposed to the unfair distribution of wealth in a society. Or a very profoundly imbalanced, if you don't want to use words like fair or moral, or even Christian, but very unbalanced distribution of wealth in a society. Jesus was pointing out that some people are too rich. Now, how might a state, whether it existed or not, redress an imbalance like that? By taking money from the richest people and giving it to the poorest people, do you think? Can we think of a word that would describe that? Or even perhaps two words that might describe the political or economic philosophy that would inevitably spring from an observation that the rich people have got too much and the poor people haven't got enough, as evinced by Jesus Christ during his sermon, in which he talked about it being easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Because I think I can think of two words that would perfectly describe the system that Jesus was obviously calling for. Welfare spending. How else would you do it, short of hiring Robin Hood? How else would you ensure a fairer distribution of wealth than by taking in taxes, if you like, although, of course, he always thought you should give back to Caesar what was Caesar's when they tried to trap him, the Pharisees, and quite possibly the Sadducees as well, tried to trap him when asking him about whether or not the people should pay taxes. How else would you effect a redistribution of wealth if not through welfare spending, something which Kemi Badenoch believes is unchristian? So the idea of looking after the less fortunate and building a society that principle is baked into has always struck me as the most fundamentally Christian thing imaginable. Literally, I'm not even exaggerating for comic or rhetorical effect. Nothing says to me Christianity more than caring for people less fortunate than yourselves. And, of course, at a state level, the only way you can do that is through taxation and welfare spending. Kemi Badenoch, and I would love to know how, has ended up in a place where she thinks welfare spending is unchristian. Because, as Jesus famously said, you're on your own, mate. Not my problem. I wish I was making this up. I'm kind of glad that I'm not. Milad is in Chiswick. Milad, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. How are you today?
Very well, mate. Well, I'm better than I was. What was it say? Better than yesterday, not as good as tomorrow. That's the path of optimism that I seek to pursue.
That's it. Always stay optimistic. I watched Rachel Reeves's Budget in real time, and
yes.
And I guess you always come to your own experience. My experience of living in England and living in London also my experience of dealing with xenophobia and racism, and trying to kind of gauge where I would put my loyalties, right? Especially when thinking about the fact that I could probably move to places like Dubai, not pay income tax.
Yeah.
And I feel like, on one side, I feel like it's my civic duty, right? Like, went to a state school, like had subsidized university at like $3,000 a year, right? So now I'm basically making a bit of money. I feel it's well within the ethos of the country, right? To like pay for those less fortunate. I think where the situation, the middle ground, which we're not appreciating, is that on one side, I think a lot of the people who are probably going to end up voting for reform and dabble in I'm not even going to say far right, but it's right wing politics. Those people who dabble, I don't think that they know who their enemy is, because I feel like our system, our media, our education does such a terrible job, right, of explaining where money ends up going. So I guess the best example I can give is, so when I go to New York and I'm walking around Brooklyn or Manhattan, I watch cash in action. I see places are busy and I see cash is kind of moving through the economy. And I feel like if more people who are sat thinking, why am I not in work? Why am I not seeing any of this money of this supposedly really healthy economy, right? Where is it going? The reality is that I feel like it's all being transferred out. And again, I don't want to sound
this is a bit niche.
About this. Yeah, it's a bit niche, but my background is economics,
sure.
And it's with a reference to development and also to look at the Western world and industrialized economies. And I just want, when I was talking to the producer, the first thing I said is I really want for my call to be optimistic, so that whoever is listening on the other side can just hear these words. I'm not leaving the country, no matter how much money the Labour government or the Tory government or God forbid, the Reform government, who I don't think will do in any way a good enough job to keep us in our kind of dominant stage in Western Europe. I'm not going to leave no matter how much they carry on putting it up. Why? Because I've gone around the country, I've spoken to people who are disabled, people who are out of employment, I've seen the most needy, desperate people in our society, and for a proud people, and I think the British people are a very proud people, for them to even have to ask for a handout, and this, I understand, and I sympathise. I can't empathise because I haven't been in that position.
Yeah.
So I just, for anyone who's listening, right, people like me are not leaving the country, right? Those people who want to go 0%, you want to go to Dubai, Habibi, have a great time,
Off
right?
You go.
Yeah, honestly, but if you actually believe in the duties and the morals, and you got your state education, and you've got your National Health Service, and your families, your parents, and your pregnant wife, my pregnant wife, as long as these people are almost
I was going to say, that was a bit of a bombshell, my lad. I'm glad we've clarified whose wife we were talking about there.
Mine. My pregnant wife.
Thank goodness for that.
Totally. And my pregnant wife, who actually works for the NHS, right?
Yeah.
So there are people in this country, right, who
there's still a lot to be proud of. There's still a lot to... And I think we've fallen into a trap today of letting the enemy set the tone, let the enemy set the discourse. Things aren't great. Things can get a lot better. Things haven't got better in any of the ways, perhaps, that we hoped they would after a change of government. But what you describe, actually, whether you realise it or not, is a determination to have other people's back. Because one day you might need people to have yours.
Totally. And just to refer to one other point,
yes.
I was watching the news the other day, and I saw Brian Eno speaking.
Yeah.
And I think the most eloquent way he put it was like off-the-cuff comment. He was like, if you want to leave, see you later, right?
Brian Eno, the musician.
The Brian Eno, the musician. He's like, I'm not worried about the millionaire class who want to basically take their money, don't want to pay their fair share of tax, and they want to leave, okay? I'm more concerned about the people who are not doing well, because at the end of the day, how many years do we have on this earth, right? Like, destructive capitalism is already ruining everything. I'm really, really proud of people like Zach Polanski and the Green Party for what they're trying to do. I'm still I'm not entirely sure because I haven't read the manifesto clearly and fully, but I completely think to myself that we're currently at this really weird junction where people don't realise where the money is going out of, and only.
I don't know if it's going out. It's definitely going up. It's not going down, despite the best efforts by people. The owner of the Daily Mail currently desperately trying to find £500 million down the back of the family sofa so that he can buy the Daily Telegraph and double his ability to persuade people that the money is going out instead of going up to people who might be able to find £500 million down the back of their family sofas. But I love that, and you've reminded me of something where you said people aren't quite sure who the enemy is, who their enemy is, which brings us back to the article today, attacking social media for being full of racist lies, coming from a corner of legacy media that has been peddling racist lies for as long as any of us can remember. Here's what I'd say, actually, inspired by Milad. Pick a side. And I don't want to turn into Penny Mordaunt, but pick a side and fight. And fighting for your country doesn't mean insulting immigrants or deporting foreigners. It means fighting for what you believe to be valuable.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Actually, I need to apologise for something first. I may have misinformed you in the past about the easiest way to get your message read out on the programme. I've suggested that if you're going to send in some criticism, you must begin it by writing, "I love you, James, but..." It just draws my eye in a curious way. I don't know why. "I love you, James, but..." And then you could say, "I think you're an absolute whopper." A weapon, a complete fool. But I've just realised, thanks to Jordan in Devon, that's only the second best way to get your message read out on the programme. The best way to get your message read out on the programme, and this is going to sound, even by my standards, obscenely cocky. The best way to get your message read out on the programme is to send me a line that makes me go, "Oh, that's good," and then reveal at the bottom that you're quoting me back at me. Is this the most obnoxiously conceited I have ever sounded? And just like Kemi Badenoch saying something stupid, there is a lot of competition for me sounding obnoxiously conceited. I think we might just have peaked. Don't blame me, blame Jordan in Devon, because he sent me this. It said, everybody's shouting about the enemy at the gates, but nobody actually bothered to check if there was an enemy there. And I thought, oh, that's good. That's just summed up the last hour. I'm going to quote that when we get back. And then I read to the end of the message, and it said James O'Brien. I think that's from my last book. It might be from my first book. It's from one of my books. So Jordan in Devon there has just absolutely unlocked that achievement. In video game parlance, he's just defeated the boss level, the most sure way to get your message. But I mean, it'll be hard now because I don't want to know that it's me until I get to the end. So there's 4 lines on the text. We're back to that thing, aren't we? Are you interested in the red button coverage of the programme? There's 4 lines on the text, of which the 4th contains only 3 words, Jordan in Devon. So I've clocked the fact that it's from Jordan in Devon, and then I've gone back to the top and started reading it, but my name sort of just fits into the body of the rest of the text, into the 3 lines that come before it, so I didn't note it. That's probably enough on this subject, actually. Come to think of it, it's possible you won't be enjoying this quite as much as I am, but anyway, I wrote that, I did. Everybody's shouting about the enemy at the gates, but nobody actually bothered to check if there was an enemy there. And that, in distillation, is UK politics as viewed through the lens of most of the UK media since approximately 2015 to date, to today. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. Right, complete change of pace. If the switchboard were a Etch-a-Sketch, we would now be tapping it furiously and giving it a good old shake. Because if you can't give a head a wobble, the next best thing is to give your metaphorical Etch-a-Sketch a wobble. Speaking of Etch-a-Sketches, they feature quite heavily in the current production of Elf the Musical at the Aldwych Theatre in the West End, starring my most excellent colleague and friend Aled Jones, who just delivers a performance of such utter beauty that he even stopped by the studio the other day and waved at me through the glass to say thank you for my warm words. Shows that you must see if you get a chance, brackets. I know tickets are expensive, close brackets, but for a Christmas treat for all the family, go and see Elf. For a 20th century acting tour de force, as in something written in the 20th century, go and see All My Sons at the Wyndhams. I have to tell you that play, that performance, all the performances in it, I don't know I've ever seen a play where every single performance was inch perfect. I've seen a lot of brilliant plays. I've seen a lot of brilliant plays with a lot of brilliant performances.
It'd be very, very hard to beat, for example, for impact in some ways, the Oedipus starring Leslie Manville and Mark Strong, which, if you're listening in New York, I believe you can currently see on Broadway. But the performances across the board in All My Sons, the cast led by Bryan Cranston, but every single person in it touches every single note of perfection in a way that you very rarely see on a stage anywhere. Let alone in your most wonderful hometown, in my case. Go and see that. And if you want to see a classic, if you want to see some Shakespeare, go and see Othello with David Harewood and Toby Jones. Just 3 plays I've seen in the last month that are up there among my all-time greats. And I get to see a lot of plays, as you know. I'm very blessed. I'm very lucky. Another reason to love London, actually, and to tell all the liars and race provocateurs to sling their collective ooks. 8 minutes after 12 is the time. That's enough digression. I'm going to return to a subject that we touched on earlier in the week, but I think, did we get overtaken by the budget? We got overtaken by something. We didn't dedicate anything like enough time to it as I would like to, and we are going to make up for it now. Trial by jury. I genuinely don't get it, okay? I should do. It's a little bit like I mean, what would it be like? It would be like tweaking the late Queen Mother's nose. It's something that is so baked into our sense of self or to our national self-image that it's never really crossed your mind that we shouldn't be doing it. And then suddenly somebody stands up and says, we're thinking of getting rid of trial by jury. Let's get the hypocrisy out of the way first. 10 minutes ago, David Lammy was adamant that we should never even contemplate getting rid of trial by jury. But he is the Justice Secretary and he has proposed to scrap it, as far as we know. It might be at a slightly earlier level of process than some of the newspapers have reported, but it doesn't matter. The fact that it is being considered at all means that it is worthy of our attention. And the plan is, as far as we know, to see defendants charged with all sorts of offences, up to but not including the very worst offences of all. So you would have burglary, affray, fraud, some lesser sexual crimes, if you can forgive me for using that infelicitous turn of phrase. There is a hierarchy of sexual crimes, of course, as there is a hierarchy of almost all crimes. Will no longer, defendants in such cases will no longer have a right to elect trial by jury. And the correct response to this, I think, is rather hard to pin down. I really do. It was only really at the end of the conversation, it got curtailed a little early, that we finally started hearing from lawyers who were very well qualified to comment. Because I don't know that I've found any lawyers yet, except David Lammy, who agree with David Lammy that it is something we should contemplate. But it did occur to me that in some ways expecting lawyers to oppose trial by jury would be a bit like expecting turkeys to vote for Christmas, wouldn't it? I'm not suggesting for a minute that completely undermines or rubbishes their position, because it obviously doesn't. Unlike Paul Dacre, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail, I'm not in the business of attacking members of the judiciary for holding opinions that I don't like or relying upon their own intelligence and judgment to arrive at conclusions instead of just towing whatever line it is the Daily Mail demands they tow. Enemies of the people. Do you remember that? High Court judges. I think John Major touched upon attacks on the judiciary in the speech that everybody except we ignored. Everybody except us ignored last week. Because it is a mark of a country that is going into a pretty hideous decline. That whole lie, that nonsense about two-tier justice was absolutely hideous for anybody who's got even a cursory knowledge of, for example, 1930s Germany. You start going after the judges, then you've got a major problem. But you can't pin this on Farage, because Paul Dacre was doing it in the immediate aftermath of Brexit, going after the judges. But judges are not perfect, and that is why we have juries. This is my understanding of the issue. One of the reasons why we have juries is that historically judges could be biased in much the way that you see in America. Donald Trump can appoint a judge who will then be almost certain to do whatever Donald Trump wants him to do in that position. But we don't have that problem here. So everybody says we've exported trial by jury right around the world. And you sort of think, well, that doesn't mean we still need it. That doesn't mean we still need it. The idea that... Do you remember the days of High Court judges blaming victims of rape or sexual assault for wearing short skirts? I think it's only a very, very old-fashioned type of radio phone-in presenter who might still do that in this day and age. Judges wouldn't anymore. I mean, because it wouldn't occur to them that that was a valid contribution to a conversation about rape or sexual assault. They might have... perhaps they lean slightly towards racial prejudice as opposed to racial prejudice, which is what you call people who use the phrase Rachel from accounts. I can't see it. And I can't help thinking that there's something wrong with me. I am usually quite, not anti-establishment exactly, but if I had to pick the people over the plum positions, I'd usually pick the people. Not for political reasons, but just because I'm very conscious of how easy it is to be out of touch. God knows who I'd be as a human being if I hadn't had the privilege of talking to you and, crucially, listening to you every day for the last 20 years. Hey, listen, you can do a job like this and learn nothing. You just put your fingers in your ears and go la, la, la every day, while completely ignoring people ringing in to tell you things you didn't previously know. But if you listen, you change. And that's why I would expect myself to be a huge advocate of trial by jury. But I'm not. I do not understand why we consider it to be so important. People I would ordinarily respect are queuing up to attack the plans. But I don't know why. I don't know what are the real zingers in this debate. What is the thing that makes you go, oh? Not the thing, we've done that, it was in the last hour, things that make you go, what? As opposed to things that make you go, oh. Can you give me one? Perhaps I should rephrase that. Could you give me that simple argument that would just make the question much clearer, much easier to answer? And you know that I worry about one encounter that I had at Isleworth Crown Court earlier this year, when I met the kind of woman whose contribution to discourse makes Kemi Badenoch look like a genius. Explaining, if you don't know this story, I'll be very brief because everyone else has heard it a million times, explaining with the straightest face you could possibly imagine to her fellow jurors that Michelle Obama was a man and that Volodymyr Zelensky had spent all the money sent to Ukraine on yachts for himself. And she was about to go into a jury room and decide somebody's fate. Crown Court, so, fairly serious crime, not the most serious of all. And I should be sitting here thinking, it's a no-brainer. It's obvious that we need trial by jury. And I possibly can't see the wood for the trees. I just can't see the zinging argument. I have great faith in the British public, even, and this is something that came out the last 2 hours. If you missed the last 2 hours, it was extraordinary listening. Beautiful radio, actually. Nothing to do with me, everything to do with the people that rang in. But I have enormous faith in the British people. That's not fair. I have enormous faith in humanity, all right? You want to see it through a lens of a painted roundabout. You could claim that it was an English condition or a British condition, but it's not. Given the opportunity, humans will not generally let you down. But I don't quite get the jury service, brouhaha. Who's best qualified to comment? Answer anybody. That's the point about jury service. What is this programme, if not a daily paean to the public, the power of the public? How often have you heard me boast about the fact that we don't really book guests on the programme unless they can tell us things that nobody else would be able to tell us? Because I'm so much more interested in the personal perspective. The man on the Clapham omnibus, the quotidian, the normal, not the, and of course we get calls from people who are supremely well qualified to comment on what they're commenting on, but we haven't phoned them up and booked them generally. They're self-appointed parenting experts or whatever ludicrous niche it is that you're going to stumble across on daytime television next. So I have much more faith in ordinary people than I do in professional opinion formers in my own world. Give me a good caller over a columnist any day of the week. But when it comes to jury service, I'm not getting it. Why is it so important? 0345 6060 973, or conversely, Why is it actually quite a good idea to get rid of it in a number of cases? Why do you agree with David Lammy and indeed David Blunkett? And I think Brian Leveson came out in favour of it as well, didn't he, in his review of reforms to tackle record court backlogs. Lord Goldsmith came out against it, the proper Lord Goldsmith, not the one just put there by Boris Johnson for, I don't know, lending him a house or something. The one that was Attorney General under Tony Blair. Loads of clever people. It's not the case that there aren't any lawyers who think this, just lawyers currently working who seem to be opposed to it. Some of the lawyers I admire the most, I'm one of the very few people in the country who actually knows who the secret barrister is, for example. They're adamant it's a stupid idea, and they're very, very rarely wrong. I can't think off the top of my head of anything they've ever been wrong about. But I can't see it, I can't feel it, I don't get it. Why do we need juries? 03456060973. Okay, hit the numbers now, you will get through. Why do we need juries? And of course, obviously, why don't we? Is also the question.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 12. This is rather splendid from a social media account called General Bowles, who operates on Blue Sky, BOLES. Kemi Badenoch's reading the Bible. She gets to the line, "Suffer little children." And she says to herself, well, that's enough for today. I think I've got the gist of it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can rewind live radio. Kemi Badenoch thinks that welfare spending is unchristian and that there was no state in the early days of Christianity. Whatever you do, don't tell her about the Roman Empire. Oh, she's the opposite of all those men. Do you remember that thing that I just don't understand? That thing last year about how often men think of the Roman Empire? Kemi Badenoch didn't even know it existed because she thought that in the early days of Christianity there was no state. Ah, the state of her. So suffer little children. Got it. It reminds me of when they asked Donald Trump. This was back when you thought people would see through him on a sufficient scale to actually send him back where he belongs. People asked Donald Trump what his favourite part of the Bible was because he's always sucking up, pretending to be Christian while leading the most unchristian life imaginable. They said, what's your favourite part of the Bible? And you've almost got to give him credit for the brass neck on this because obviously he couldn't even think of a single thing in the Bible, so he said all of it. What's your favourite part of the Bible, Trumpy? All of it. Oh, come on, you must be able to pick a bit. No, I'm not going to pick a bit. All of it. All of the Bible. All of the Bible is my favourite bit. Kemi Badenoch has managed to somehow achieve the almost opposite of that while sounding equally stupid. How much of the Bible are you familiar with? None of it. None of it at all. None of it. Because, of course, if there was no state in the early Christian times, then who crucified Jesus? Without a jury, as far as I can remember, which is a perfect segue to the conversation that we're having now. Darren is in Greenwich. To jury or not to jury, Darren?
Well, I'm in favour of it. I've just recently returned from jury service, I think, obviously the intent is that the judge is a human who will have some form of subconscious bias, and having 12 randomly selected people is designed to eradicate that. But I think the point I wanted to make was just with cost in mind, that the process is hugely inefficient and possibly somewhat antiquated, and just... I had some opinions on how it could be more time effective and therefore more cost effective.
Okay, yeah, briefly if you would, because there's loads of. I mean, it's a bit cheeky me telling you to be brief, but there you go. It's my show. No. Go on.
Of course. So I mean, the main point is that when you're given the evidence at the end, you're given very clear direction by the judge on what the kind of matters of the law are and what evidence you're allowed to consider. And when you're locked in a room, it's just the 12 of you with no mediation, and people can and do bring lots of personal beliefs into the equation. And in my opinion, we reached the verdict after a very long time, I think mainly because people got bored and agreed to agree, and with some mediation around what could and couldn't be considered, the whole process probably would have taken 2 hours rather than 16, which it took in our case.
16 hours?
Yes.
So two days, give or take.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much.
It's not a marathon, is it? But you think you'd have got there much quicker with professional help?
Absolutely. I mean, you're not allowed to discuss the specifics of what happened in the room, but I mean, there were probably 2 out of 12 individuals consumed all but 1 or 2 hours of the process, and with mediation, they could have been kind of directed back to the points of law and what they were allowed to consider rather than their own personal judgment.
That's really interesting, Darren, isn't it? Because it's being presented very binary. Either we have it or we don't. Scott points out the phone-in should really be, do you agree with David Lammy now or David Lammy 6 months ago? But the point that you make is that it's imperfect but improvable.
Yes. Exactly.
You don't abolish something for being imperfect but improvable. Would it undermine... Because, I mean, what we're talking about is individual bias, right? And the strongest argument, I suppose, in favour, which you've kind of aired, is that it's much harder for 12 people to be biased than it is for one person. If you get one biased judge, it's game over. If you're much less likely to get 12 biased jurors, and they can, of course, argue with each other. But wouldn't the mediator then become the problem? So if you had a biased mediator, then all of the same problems just rise up again.
Oh, I think the mediator would have a very defined role. They'd be allowed to, refer back to the matters of the law, intervene when something that wasn't in evidence was inferred, and so on. At the moment, the jury, they select their own foreperson, and certainly,
and the foreman of the clerk of the court is very well. It's quite an expert job, isn't it? They're very across the rights and the wrongs, the rubric, the regulations, and that you would just extend that role.
Exactly that, yeah. I mean, in our case, the person who nominated themselves as foreperson wasn't, really of sufficient leadership experience to handle a conversation like of 12 people.
It's a bit like Groucho Marx, isn't it? It's a bit like not wanting to be in a club that would have me as a member. Anyone who puts their own hand up when they're asking for a foreman of the jury should be automatically excluded from being foreman of the jury. But you don't know each other, so you're not going to really be able to arrive at much of a judgment about who should be foreman of the jury when you've only just met.
No, exactly. I mean, it wasn't until they kind of, began the proceedings that you got the sense that they might have put themselves forward to further their own agenda.
Or just because they love the sound of their own voice. And don't we hate people like that, Darren?
Well, I think in our case it was both of them.
I see, old me, thank you, I love that. What a constructive contribution. Old me would have had his hand up like a rat up a drain pipe. Like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, who should be foreman of the jury? Well, I think you'll find I'm a professional communicator. I twirls moustache. I do this for a living. I'd be happy to take over and be foreman. When I actually got to Isleworth Crown Court in February, it's the last thing I would have done. Not least because I was really interested in the process and not really interested in listening to myself, which I do for several hours every day. But, of course, I never got called. Well, I got called twice, but I never got to, hour 2. Got sworn in twice, and both juries I was on got discharged. Never found out why. Thank you, Darren. Sanjay's in Whitechapel. Sanjay, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. Yes, I wanted to make the case for, if you can forgive the pun, for...
I wouldn't even have noticed it if you hadn't pointed it out. Go on.
Well, there you go, James. You've got to call it with some modest material.
Well played.
But no, it was really just to relate from my own personal experience how I believe in some cases a jury need not be necessary.
Yeah.
And I wanted to refer back to a court case that I was involved in. The case has now been closed. It was 2 years ago. Did get the outcome in my favour. I won't get into specifics or details or name anyone in whatsoever. Okay. But just to give you the principles of why I believe it's not necessary in some cases. My dad was the fatal victim of a hit-and-run driver.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Are you there? Are you all right? I think we've lost the line. I think that was just a coincidental combination of content and technology. Are you there, Sanjay?
Yeah, I'm James.
Sorry,
sorry
I'm really sorry to hear about your dad.
Yeah, so what happened since is that it was scheduled for a hearing at the Old Bailey.
Yeah.
And we went for a pre-trial hearing at my local Crown Court, and that was in front of a Crown Court judge. No jury was present. And it was through the evidence that the CPS had compiled that there was sufficient grounds for him to be charged for. We were chasing for death by dangerous driving.
Yes.
But there was a gap in the evidence, which is why it was potentially going to be put forward towards a jury, whereby there was some degree of liability that was being attached to my dad.
Right.
But there wasn't sufficient evidence. There wasn't CCTV. There wasn't clear-cut witness accounts or anything that could corroborate to what degree his liability was. But nevertheless, there was sufficient evidence that was gathered pre and after that demonstrated that certainly there was a charge for death by dangerous, at least death by careless driving that could be made. And I think, to cut the long story short, it was a combination of the judge on the day and my lawyer, consulting with the other side's lawyer, whereby they came to an agreement whereby is it really necessary for us to go through a protracted process involving many days, in fact 5 days were scheduled for this hearing at the Old Bailey, go through all that procedure and protocol when there is already enough here for us to say, look, this is some poor evidence of driving, and without
an open and shut case, essentially.
It was a pretty much open and shut case. So I think, so I think that those are the cases where there isn't so much degree of conjecture.
But would the accused agree with you if they were here today?
No, they didn't, because they entered the courtroom saying they were not guilty. That was their position.
And they are innocent until they're proven guilty.
Of course, yeah.
But
so
you can be. Your argument is you can be proven guilty without a jury.
Correct. Yeah, and also, I think from my perspective as a victim, the police were saying to me also on the side that, look, do you realise that if we do go to a jury trial, you don't know who's going to be on the jury, and you might have someone who may have had an unpleasant experience with the police or may have some sympathy to the driver concerned. Of course. And worst case scenario, what if he were to get off scot-free and come out completely not guilty?
Yeah.
And he can have every right to defend his position. I'm not going to deny that. But I think there's a good example whereby I think through some stewardship and some shepherding from people who have some intelligence about the dynamics of the court system and the legal process and the evidence that they've pulled together, taking that just holding it at arm's length and realising actually, why do we need to go through this process?
And that is what a judge is actually there to do, essentially, albeit that rather than arrive at the conclusion, which they did in your case, which means that the evidence must have been absolutely stone cold, they would instead instruct, as it were, the jury. I'm so sorry, Sanjay, that you were in a position to make this contribution. I really am. But thank you, because it is powerful. One thing that occurred to me listening to Sanjay was that in many ways, the reason why I find this such an intractable question is because the strengths of jury service are also the weaknesses. The same thing from one experience to the next. It shifts from being a strength to being a weakness. Interesting also that both callers have talked about stewardship and shepherding, albeit the first caller, Darren, talking about the stewardship and shepherding of the jury while not wanting to get rid of it, and then Sanjay talking about the stewardship and the shepherding of the case or of the court as an argument for getting rid of jury service. So, not to make light of anything that we've just heard, I'm still very, very unclear on what it is we would lose in the event of jury service being abolished in many, many cases.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. Andy is in Chelmsford and he knows how to play this game. Here's what he's written. James, brilliant show, expertly presented. Right, now I have your attention. Speaking as a retired police officer, in my eyes, trial by jury is an absolute must, as it removes any political influence on or personal bias, which we all have, of judges. Yes, it does. But what if you were a person of colour and you turned up for a trial and you saw Robert Jenrick, Katie Lamb, Sarah Poachin, Nigel Farage and all the rest of them sitting on the benches? I guess the argument is it would be much worse if one of them was the judge, because if they were on the jury, then their bigotry and racism or prejudice could be leavened by the other jurors. So Andy's point is strong, and yet I don't know why, and I apologise for using a word or not a word, but I apologise for not being more articulate. I don't feel it. I would expect to have felt it. Could it all be because of that silly woman that I met in February? I never met her, actually. That silly woman I encountered in February. The Michelle Obama is a man woman. If you don't know what I'm talking about, remember you can rewind live radio. How many people, when we were talking about Kemi Badenoch, thinking that there was no state in the early Christian days? Well, I wonder what they were paying taxes for. Who were they paying their taxes to, do you think, the Romans? And, of course, all the people that they'd conquered, who were also required to pay taxes. How many people thought that Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem to celebrate Christmas? I love that. Why did Mary and Joseph go to Bethlehem at Christmas? Well, because it was Christmas. Why was the inn full? Christmas, wasn't it? Things are always busy at Christmas. You got to book early at Christmas. Why was the inn for there isn't any room at the inn because it's Christmas, as the song doesn't go. But I just genuinely wonder how many people, without really thinking about it, because if you stop to think about it, you probably would have realised it couldn't have been Christmas, because Christmas is celebrating the birth of a baby that hasn't been born yet. A bit like yesterday's right-wing treatment of the budget, which was attacking babies who haven't been born yet. But how many people knew it was a census? I work with people who didn't even know it was a census, and there's nothing wrong with that. I went to very strange schools and ended up doing an A-level in religious history a year early because that's how strange my school was. But quite how you could end up in an adulthood allied to the idea that there was no state in early Christian times and indeed no welfare. I mean, that is anyway, I digress. I suppose I should mention you could end up with Kemi Badenoch on your jury. A woman so stupid you can pretty much see her stupidity from space. But then you might have someone really clever sitting next to her on the jury. And they kind of cancel each other out. Whereas if the stupid person was the judge, what chance have you got? Paula's in Chertsey. Paula, what do you reckon?
In a nutshell, very quickly, James,
yes.
Last year, June the 4th, my son was on a bicycle and he was hit by a car at 45 miles an hour. It was being chased by a police car. The car was dumped 100 yards up the road.
I'm sorry.
We went to magistrates' court and there was a jury, of course. Yeah. They were sent out twice because they couldn't make up their mind. In the end, they came back with not guilty. There were two people in the car. They both blamed each other for driving, and they got off scot-free. That's it. They're walking as if nothing's happened.
There was no joint enterprise or anything like that, or you could send them both down because they wouldn't agree?
No. There's a loophole, apparently. I'm in the middle of talking to my MP about it because... my son's 35. He's lost 35 years of memory. He cannot make memories and he's in a care home. He needs care for the rest of his life.
I'm sorry.
So, and I just can't get my head around it, James.
No, of course
it's like me and you could go out and murder someone. As long as there's no cameras around, just blame each other and get off with it.
I mean, that last bit can't be true. If it was actually murder they were accused of, but because the rules of the road are very odd to me and very different from some of the other rules, but it feels like that to you, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
And why does this turn you against juries? Because, you know, I don't know what else. I mean, there aren't any juries. I'm not picking holes in your story, I promise. But
no.
But it was Crown Court, the trial. But you think that magistrates or judges without a jury would have arrived at a more sensible conclusion?
I don't know what conclusion they would have arrived at, James, but I would have preferred it to be left in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing. Would you give a really important vote to stupid people? I'm sorry. That's how I feel.
Yeah, well, but we do, don't we?
Yeah.
You're leading me back to one of my favourite subjects.
Exactly. I'm not even going to mention it, but I'm with you there.
You better not. So, this is horrible, this story. I'm so sorry for what you're going through and what your boy's going through. But the idea that nobody is held responsible for it is, it's
crazy, isn't it?
It's absolutely crazy. It's utterly unbearable.
They perjured the court. And then eventually they both admitted to being in the car and said, yes, we were there.
But we weren't driving.
But we weren't driving, so it must have been one of those. I can't believe this. Yeah.
Would you stay on the line and just give Eleanor a little bit more detail? I don't think I can do anything about it. I just want to find out more. And
I messaged you straight after the court case on WhatsApp. Yeah, and obviously it wasn't your time to speak about this.
Also, I probably wouldn't have seen it because I get so many every day. Yes. But I look up. But that's why I want to find out a little bit more. So just give the details to Eleanor if you would. And I mean solely in the first instance because I want to understand things better. I don't think I'm not going to be able to do anything about it except invite you on again to talk about how unfair this whole thing feels, and is indeed.
Yeah. So, can I just say my son's name? His name's Tarek, and he's my firstborn, and he's a very special boy.
Of course you can. Can you imagine what would have happened if I'd said no?
I would have said it anyway.
I just wanted to make you smile there, Paula. I hope you don't mind.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And Tarek, you take care. Take care of him and as much as you can, take care of yourself. It is 12:41. Ah, dear. Peter's on the Wirral. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I'm not keen on this idea from David Lammy about the removing jury services. I believe that I want to be judged by my peers if I'm going to go for a serious offence. I want a group of my peers, my community, to judge whether I am that the evidence against me is good enough than to do that. That's my opinion. However, I do have conditions with that. It was a bit like one of your early callers, which I think the system needs modifying for today's world. So for things like, I've done jury service myself. It was way back in the 90s, so it was in the dark ages. So but I've done jury service, so I know what the process is, and I know what the judge does. I know how well the judge directs a jury in terms of law. And I hate to say this, but the last person you were just talking to, we're blaming the jury. The judge will have directed them on what they can and can't plead. Give a guilty verdict to. So, I'm just saying, it's just.
I understand what you're saying, and you're being sensitive. So, thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a horrible system. I understand. There's a lot of.
But I'm still not. I still want to know what's in the nutshell. Because, I know all these phrases. I want to be judged by, 12 good men and true, and these days men and women, and I want to be judged by a jury of my peers. What do I lose when I lose the right to a trial by jury?
Well, what you lose is the ability for the jury to do what the CPS does, actually. In a sense, the CPS, when they look at the evidence before they make a charge or allow the police to go forward to a charge, they look at, is this in the public interest? And I think that's partly what a jury can do. They can say, we think he's wrong, but, is putting this 85-year-old man, in jail because he bumped in the trolley into... You know what I'm saying about this, James?
I do, yeah.
A judge would say, and judges are really good at what they do. I'm not knocking them.
Usually.
But a judge will only go by the law, the letter of the law, whereas a jury has a slight bit
more
of
humanity, a bit more humanity brought into things. There have been recent cases where the jury went against the directions of the judge. I think in one quite prominent case, but I'm a little wary of mentioning it because I think there are other cases unfolding involving similar issues and the similar organisations. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how strongly do you feel this? I'm sorry for the stupidity of that question.
In terms of keeping, I'm really strong on it. But the other thing I was going to say with this, James,
quickly.
If he's quick, if he wants to do this, then I would suggest that alongside that, we have to get rid of the magistrates and have judges at the lower levels and not magistrates because they're not trained in the law.
I get that's another conversation, but you're absolutely right. I don't think there is a suggestion of putting magistrates in this role because they are, of course, civilians, and some of them are wonderful, some of them are not. I mentioned the worst nightmare of an innocent person of colour turning up in court and seeing Robert Jenrick, Katie Lamb, and I said Sarah Pochin, the Reform UK woman who doesn't like seeing brown people in adverts. Turned out she was a magistrate. I didn't actually know that, and I do this stuff for a living. If I told you that she had been reprimanded for using her status as a magistrate to influence colleagues, she had found a finding of misconduct was made against her by the Judicial Conduct Investigations Office in 2018. Nothing, of course, in there that would stop her becoming a Member of Parliament for Nigel Farage's outfit. But when it was pointed out to them that they had put a woman who had been found to have committed misconduct in the role, What do you think they said? This is a multiple choice for you. So Sarah Pochin, found to have reprimanded for using her status as a magistrate to influence colleagues. Will Reform UK have claimed that it was A, politically motivated, B, that she was just asking questions, or C, that Vladimir Putin made her do it? So when it turned out that a woman that they put into Parliament had form as a magistrate for having fallen below the standards expected of a magistrate, would their defence be A, this was a politically motivated business, even though she was a member of a different political party at the time? B, she was just asking questions, and we all just ask questions, and just because we're asking questions doesn't mean that we're making any point whatsoever? Or C, Vladimir Putin made her do it and ran away? I'll tell you after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. I think that Matt might have a point when he writes, that is the worst hook and tease you ever did, James. And as with the stupidest thing that Kemi Badenoch has ever said, there is a heck of a lot of competition. But you're probably right. It's obvious, isn't it? That after she was found to have, she was reprimanded for using her status as a magistrate to influence colleagues. She was found, her behaviour was found to have fallen below the standards expected of a magistrate. She was a Conservative councillor at the time, but of course that doesn't stop Reform UK claiming that it was all a politically motivated attack. When she was found to have done those things. I speak of that Sarah Pochin woman, you know, the one who doesn't like seeing brown faces in adverts. Well, I say that. It actually drives her mad, which is a little bit chicken and egg. Was it the brown faces in adverts that drove her mad, or does she hate seeing brown faces in adverts because she's mad? I don't know. But anyway, she was a magistrate. What would you rather have, her sitting in judgment on you or a jury? Yeah, we've just swung the pendulum back again, haven't we? Sheba is in Hackney. Sheba, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
James, I've done jury service 4 times.
Greedy?
Something like that. But the limit is 3.
That's what I thought.
The limit is 3, and I was called up a 4th time, so I did it anyway. And one of the things that I know unequivocally, having done jury service 4 times, is that most people are a bit thick.
Yeah, okay. Go on, tell me more.
Not some, not all.
Of course.
I sit there and I take my notes, and I did that from the very start. I take notes, and I look around when we're deliberating. I think, but where did you get that from? People make up stories in their head. They impose something on the story that's being told to connect it to something they said. I couldn't believe some of the things people have said, and I have my notes. And, you know, the last time I did jury service, the verdict broke my heart.
Really? You feel that? I mean, it was a majority decision then, was it?
It wasn't. A majority, yes, in the end. But
and you felt they got it completely wrong? Completely
wrong. And there was me and one other woman that held out because we knew that we knew. And the bullying that takes place. I left in there at one point, and I'm a tough cookie, James.
Yeah, clearly.
I left the room in tears because they were bullying me, and I knew what I knew. The final person...
You didn't know what you knew. You thought what you thought, surely. You can't know for sure. Otherwise, you can't know for sure.
I thought what I thought. I'm going to go with that, James.
Okay,
I thought what I thought.
Good. And, I am what I am. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. Sorry, carry on. It's Friday. We're nearly at the end of the week.
I hear that. There's bullying that takes place, so you have to be strong.
Yes.
There were 2 things I heard jurors say to me that I couldn't believe. One girl on one case said she had done it. She was doing it for the 2nd time, and she said...
No, remember, you're not allowed to... You know the rules, don't you? Because you've done it 4 times.
I'm not going to say nothing about the case.
Good.
She just said...
You're not allowed to say anything that happened in the deliberation room either.
Oh, okay.
No, it's all right. She said something really daft. I can fill in the gaps.
Really, really unbelievable. That I looked at her with my mouth open.
Yeah.
And I just think, going forward, most people are a bit thick. They cannot work it out. They cannot deliberate. They get bullied into going with the majority.
But just because you're a bit thick, it doesn't stop you from being Prime Minister in Liz Truss's case. So why should it...
Absolutely.
Or Jacob Rees-Mogg, he's never been held back by being a bit thick, so why shouldn't they be allowed to be jurors?
Because you have to be able to work things out.
So professional juries would be your favoured option, rather than judges?
Absolutely.
I think you have that. I mean, a jurist is a thing. I don't know where you have that, but maybe on particularly complicated cases in some countries. Every caller's come up with a different answer to the question, and I thought it was binary. That probably is why I can't come up with a strong position on this, with a strong opinion. It's a really nice full disclosure this week with Hal Cruttenden, the comedian and actor. I don't think Hal would mind me saying that he's not the most famous person that's ever been on Full Disclosure, but he's certainly one of the nicest, and he's done it all. A really interesting journey that he's been on, that he shares with me on this week's episode.
I didn't like being a child actor very much at all.
Why not?
Because I did do quite a few jobs, but I just felt like I felt like we were annoyances, children. The first screen job I got was about 2 months after finishing in another country, and my first scene is with Anthony Hopkins in a thing on Channel 4 called A Married Man. And I'd just seen The Elephant Man, where he was the lead with John Hurt. And I was such a nervous kid. I mean,
it's a very odd thing for a nervous kid to do.
I know. This is what I really should think about properly in therapy. Why have I ended up a performer, and then doing the stand up, which is even worse. Anyway, but I mean, literally, I used to hop from one leg to another. They got rid of it when I was doing another country in rehearsals. They went, you're doing that. And I went, oh, am I? And I think I took about 12 takes for this first shot with Anthony Hopkins, because they said, do you know you're going from foot to foot? I went, what was it? I literally had a nervous habit as an actor.
Yeah.
Anthony Hopkins again, so sweet. The camera's over his shot doing my shot, and I'm just showing him where to go at this school. I'm a schoolboy. And I did it was a day's filming.
Sure.
And he was so sweet. He's literally given me direction with the camera, everything, just going, just slow, like that.
Amazing.
And I said, but you're a major star. And so, I'm very good. I probably retired as a child actor, went away, calmed down a bit.
I'm going to... That's Hal Cruttenden on this week's Full Disclosure. And just listening to that, I just realised something. You know rock family trees? You know when they do family trees of rock bands because, they played in one band before they joined another? I can start doing a Full Disclosure family tree just from the last few weeks, just from the last month. So Hal Cruttenden there is the brother of the actress Abigail Cruttenden, who... men of my age will remember from starring in Patang Yang Kippa Bang, that magnificent film that was broadcast on the second night of Channel 4. But she recently played Sir Thomas More's wife in the West End in A Man for All Seasons. And guess who was playing Sir Thomas More? Martin Shaw, who is coming up on a very soon episode of Full Disclosure. You know I'm a bit of a sucker for thespians and actors, but these are just all lovely blokes. But he also mentioned The Elephant Man, which you might not know stars Toby Jones's dad. Toby Jones currently starring in Othello. You know him from Mr. Bates versus the Post Office and pretty much everything else that's going on at the moment. The Richard Burton film, Mr. Burton, is a thing of particular beauty. So he mentioned The Elephant Man, and Toby Jones, who was on Full Disclosure about a fortnight ago, his dad, Freddie Jones, was in The Elephant Man. So that is a Full Disclosure family tree that links Hal Cruttenden, this week's guest, to Toby Jones, who was on a couple of weeks ago, to Martin Shaw, who would be on it in a couple of weeks, via his own sister Abigail, who's never been on it. I don't know whether you find stuff like that enjoyable. I think it's lovely. David is in Chorley with the last word on jury service. David, what's it going to be?
Quick one. I fell across a documentary on Channel 4 this year called The Jury.
Oh, yes.
And those that haven't watched it should watch it, because you actually get an opportunity to see the inside workings of a jury.
Yeah.
12 Joe Public people picked at random to come together, and they're actually presented with a real case that had been heard in the court. The judge and the prosecutors, etc., are played by actors, but they're using verbatim script of what happened. And then it films them in the jury room, how they come across selecting...
The only bit that's not scripted is in the jury room.
Absolutely. It's actually real. And straight away, somebody walks in the first time they've just seen the accused and says, well, he looks guilty.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how the biases come out.
And you get different results. Am I right? Am I thinking of the same programme? They do two juries on the same case and get different results.
No, there's another one, though. There's one that actually just uses one jury.
Right.
But what they do instead is they actually then present a jury at the end after hearing that jury's verdict.
Yeah.
They tell them what happened in the real one, and it can be quite shocking.
Whoa.
The Australian one on Netflix is unbelievable. actually just watch it. It's a little bit like 12 Angry Men.
Oh, yeah,
Fonda film.
Yeah, it's a brilliant film.
People bring their biases in, and people are prepared.
So, what did this do to your relationship with jury service? Did you come away thinking it was better or worse than you went in?
No, it depends on the individuals. You just had a lady on this.
Yeah, but it doesn't, though, does it? Because you don't get to choose the individuals. It's jury service. Do you like it or not like it?
Well, there's that. Yeah, of course. It depends on whether you... I mean, like the 12 Angry Men, one of the guys says in that film straight away, can we get this over quick? I've got a football match to go to.
Why are Australian versions of television programmes always madder than the British versions?
Because they're ex-convicts from the UK.
A little bit of mild racial stereotyping to end the week. Thank you, David. Not anymore, they're not. They're people fleeing the post-Brexit hellscape that the United Kingdom has become, according to the ONS figures, which is something that Sheila's going to get stuck into shortly. I love Australians, by the way. I'm not standing with David on that one. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen, except the rugby players, you can listen back on our free, and the cricketers, on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date on the top story, especially the cricketers, and opinions. Put your news categories in the order you want. You can pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, best bits of this every day, and indeed Full Disclosure. 5 Degrees of Full Disclosure is the game we invented a moment ago. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now.
James O'Brien on LBC.